Sir,
Deputy Lavey.
I wonder if, before the debate continues, if we might talk procedure, because very often when we have this conversation, it's towards the end of the day, and it's too late for people with children to make arrangements, childcare arrangements. And what I'm hoping to establish is what is the latest time at which the Assembly would sit today if it needs to. So that members with children can make the appropriate arrangements. I know it's tricky because we don't know at what stage of the debates that we're going to arrive at by 5:30, but if we were to decide on a time that we won't go later from now, I think that would help those members with those difficulties. So I would propose that if we need to, we set a time, the latest time that the Assembly will sit today at 7 p.m.
So can I suggest that is if we are intending to close business today?
Deputy Teddy.
So I don't think that's acceptable. I think I for one have got business that I need to attend to at 5:30. So I'd suggest we set the time for today at 5:30. But my personal circumstance is probably the least important. We have, as the Deputy has said, families in this Assembly, and it's been a view that we should move to more family-friendly working hours. And when we are likely to have sittings, these things need to be arranged in advance so we can plan and prepare. I think we need to consider whether we come back tomorrow if we need to, and what time we sit until tomorrow, and what business we do. But I think, I know the Deputy's got the best intentions, but I think to give short notice is not satisfactory for many reasons.
Deputy Truscott.
Yes, well, I agree with Deputy Ted here on this matter. I think perhaps, and I'm not sure if I'm in a position to actually barter a time, but 4 o'clock might be more appropriate, because then we can at least see where we're at and whether we have to actually consider tomorrow. Thanks.
Constable St Mary.
Likewise, sir, I have a parish assembly this evening, and there's no way that I can miss it.
Chief Minister.
So all I was going to say is my understanding is that we'd agreed, unless it was just we'd indicated that tomorrow was going to be a further continuation day. I think we should stick with that plan personally and stick to the normal timing and address matters then.
Technically, the Assembly hasn't actually agreed that tomorrow's further continuation day. It's been advertised as a possibility, but the Assembly hasn't yet agreed anything on that front. Deputy Lavey, did you want to?
So I'm grateful to those members for their contributions. I'm quite happy to propose now that the Assembly will adjourn at 5:30 p.m. no matter or within given or take sensible minutes. But I'm quite happy to make that the proposal. I just want to ensure that those members with children and have to make arrangements know where they stand. I'm very happy. But I think the Assembly should take the decision now, no matter what stage of the debates we're at, so that those people with children can make the appropriate arrangements. So I amend my proposition to say that the Assembly agrees to adjourn no later than 5:30 today at whatever stage the business is at.
Is that proposition seconded?
Yes, sir.
Deputy Gardner, did you wish to speak? Your blight went on.
Yeah, I would like to speak because it was my request from Deputy Labby follow yesterday's sitting when I almost missed picking up my daughter from nursery by 6 o'clock. Ask if I would know by lunchtime as a mother that I need to make alternative arrangements for my daughter after 5:30. Probably by lunchtime I would be able to arrange to stay here later on.
Constable St Clement. Okay. In that case, the proposition is for the Assembly to agree now to adjourn at 5:30 or thereabouts. Those members who are in favour, kindly show. Those against? I think that's been agreed to. Deputy Labby, would it be sensible, while we're in the mood, to deal with Friday as a continuation day?
Yes, I think it would be, sir. I think it is inevitable that there will be unfinished business by 5:30 today. I am also cognizant, because of asking members a couple of weeks ago, that there are some members who have very good reason, prior arrangements out of the island for whatever reason, that cannot be here tomorrow, on Friday. And I think they might wish to say that in the discussions that will follow when I take my seat. So the likelihood is, I think, that Senator Moore's proposition on the Ville de Manoir is we will not reach that today, but we could reach it tomorrow. So the question for members is those who will be here and those who won't, whether they are prepared for that to go ahead without them, whether they want to take part, whether it should be held over until May 21st sitting. And Senator Moore might want to talk about that too.
So is the proposition that the Assembly sit on Friday, tomorrow?
I will make that proposition, sir, that that we do have the continuation day, but...
Do you want to hear views first?
I do.
Okay, Senator Moore.
Sir, I think the Chairman of the Privileges and Procedures Committee had heard from members when he canvassed opinion that there were many members away on Friday, which calls into question, A, why it wasn't agreed earlier that we should have started this sitting on Monday so that questions could have been dealt with on Monday as they would have normally. And B, perhaps we should be looking to Tuesday as a continuation day. Personally, I cannot move my proposition, A, because one of the important reasons I'm bringing it is due to timing, and B, because I'll be absent on State's business on the 21st of May.
Deputy Doublé.
So regrettably, I'll be out of the island tomorrow. I would prefer to be here for any continuation day, so my preference would be to continue on Tuesday next week.
Is there any other member? Councillor Greville.
So the same as Deputy Doublé, so I will be out of the island tomorrow and would like to be here for the debate.
Chief Minister.
If I could just make the point, firstly, I'm out of the island on Tuesday and Wednesday, sir, but also bear in mind it's the run-up to the Liberation Day celebrations. I do know there are various groups that are arriving in the early part of that week. I can't recall on Tuesday, sir, but certainly we have visitors from both New Jersey and UK House of Commons. And so there may be individuals who cannot, and I'm talking numbers of individuals who cannot attend at various points on that Tuesday. That is a guess, sir. It's definitely true for Wednesday. I think it applies to part of Tuesday as well.
Deputy Martin.
Oh yes, briefly, sir. Each day is going to be awkward for everybody. But I just wanted. Did Senator Moore say that she could bring the proposition tomorrow, but not tomorrow? If we sit tomorrow, it's okay. I just.
If we get to my proposition, I could on Friday, but I know that there are many members who cannot take part on Friday.
So I even just want to throw another spanner in the works because the Constable of Grouville has said he can't be here tomorrow, and we could well be on his amendment. And we think we need to have a serious think of what's going on because we've agreed we can't sit late. But if we're halfway through that debate, well, what do we do? I mean, we are getting a very it's very messy. Not everybody's going to be. I know someone who's already going to be off Ireland tomorrow, and it's been arranged for ages. Not me. I've just come back, but I don't know what to do for the best. I don't want to stifle any debate, so it's but I'm now concerned about being halfway through a debate that's never going to finish.
Deputy Pamplin.
So will it be helpful if to speed this process up, that we have a quick moment now for everybody to put their lights on, who is definitely here on Friday, who is definitely not, so we can get that done so we can move on, because we're talking ironically about time. Let's act quickly.
Constable St Clements.
So, just briefly, I'm another one of those who can't be here tomorrow because of prior travel commitments made. And really, it does bother me that we're going to go ahead with two major, critical, important debates with at least half a dozen members not here. I really think it's wrong that two important debates, and particularly the one of Senator Mezek, should take place on a date where the states were not intending to sit. And really, if anything is going to be delayed, I don't like to say this, but it should be that debate on the role of the bailiff, which should be held on a date when the states were planned to sit. Therefore, that is the debate that should be deferred to May the 21st. And Senator Morse can go ahead if she so wishes, or the states wish, with fewer numbers there. But I think because we know so many members are going to be away, it would be wrong to have the debate on a constitutional matter with so many members we know are going to be absent, sir.
Deputy Tadier.
Thanks, sir. I'm not sure if that's true, because we knew it was going to be a heavy agenda, and nobody stood up at the beginning of the week and said, hang on a minute, some of these things are more important than others, so let's decide which order we want to take them in, which we could have done. That's within our power. So the first point is, although it's not immediately helpful to resolving this situation, is that PPC needs to give serious consideration to the management of business, especially when we have a scenario where government business, I don't like to say, is competing with the very laudable and necessary propositions that also come from backbenchers, whether they need to start looking at windows and actually prescribing times where the votes are going to be taken, because it's ultimately the votes which are the most important parts. And I know there were political sensitivities around that, and certainly in the past I've perhaps also resisted that, because there's a balance between freedom of speech.
Deputy, I hate to interrupt, but we're now debating a completely different topic to whether the Assembly should sit tomorrow or not, and we're taking up a lot of time from the debates you're talking about, if you see what I mean.
Fine, that's fine, and I'm hoping I won't need to say these in the future. So as for tomorrow, I think the reason we should sit tomorrow is because we're talking about reasons why in a different world this is not the correct way to do things, but we have a way to do business, which is you stay until the order paper has been finished or until we decide to adjourn. Tomorrow has been indicated as continuation day. We already knew that. This remains on the paper, and we can effectively decide whether to take this or not today by dispatching with any amendments quickly or not, and giving them the length of time. But the way this Assembly works, which is perhaps the reason why we should reject the super majority argument, is that we work on the basis of who is here at any given time, and you work on the basis of getting a majority for those votes. That's what we've done up until now. We can't simply change it because there's a particular vote coming up that we think is more important than many of the other hundreds and thousands of votes that have proceeded in this historic Assembly over the centuries.
So, Deputy Labby, do you want to maintain a proposition? Do you want us to have a roll call of who's potentially present Friday or next Tuesday? How do you want to proceed?
Well, firstly, I don't think it's appropriate to change the order of business. Senator Mezek has a claim to keep his proposition where it is on the order of business, excuse me, for very important timeline reasons. So that would be most unfair. I think we know we are going to adjourn at 5:30 today. I think we should continue, see where we are at 5:30, and address the situation as to the continuation day at that time.
Well, we can do that. We don't have to decide it now, but there is a risk that we'll get to 5:30 and we'll end up having a half-hour debate at that point, just when we're supposed to have adjourned.
Well, let's test the mood. Sorry, I'm so sorry to cut you off, sir.
I asked a very straightforward question. I got an answer to a different question, and I'm just trying to bring you back. I think the Assembly is ready to express some sort of view about whether to sit on Friday or next week.
I'm grateful to you, sir, and I propose that Friday is a continuation day and that we do sit on Friday. I make that proposition now.
Is that seconded? All those members in favour kindly show. Those against? The Assembly will therefore sit on Friday as a continuation day. So, if we can resume the debate on the draft amendment number 39 of the stand orders. Last speaker is Deputy Truscott. Does anybody else wish to speak on the stand order? Deputy Martin.
Yes, thank you, sir. I listened to Senator Farnham's speech when I was coming back in the car from the funeral I had to attend, and I was listening, I'm thinking, now, does he make a point? The only point I could actually see him making, being one of those members in here since Clothier, on the amount of debates we've had on reform, one way or the other, that we might not have any more. Now, was that a good thing? So, I don't think so. We haven't got there. We didn't do Clothier. We took our eye off the ball. Ended up with no electoral reform and ministerial government. And I don't want us to get there again. But also, I didn't want to speak just before lunch because I wanted to look something up, sir, because we remember the last electoral reform was P133 by Deputy Andrew Lewis of St Helier. And there was, it was big constituencies, and it was all, they were all going to be called senators, but there was no senators as such in Ireland-wide. So there was an amendment by Senator Rosef to bring 6 senators back, which was amended by Senator Farnham to make that 8. So I had to look up the votes, sir. The 6 got 25 votes, and the Senator Farnham's vote got 28 votes. So be very careful what you wish for, because you would not have amended that, and Senator Farnham would not have been in this assembly now, because we would have had big constituencies. Sir, it's there. I've printed them all off. They're all here. So, you know, it was a good amendment, and actually there was a last amendment again, and it did reach just the 32, which was on whatever it is, bring a referendum. So we have reached 32, but the actual what we decide in here, and electoral reform, constitution, we've all got different opinions, we all come from it, and I don't think we're ever going to get around that table. It's got to be debated in here, it's got to have a chance. I think 25 sometimes pushing it, but I can live with that, it's constitutional. But moving it to 2/3, 32, it'd be a few less if we go. I just, a simple soul, sir, think it's fair, we are where we are, and it's not limping over the line. It's sometimes so passionate debates that go on and on with amendments, and there'll be overvoting it. But they are the things. There was only 2 votes in a ministerial government on a 7 o'clock on a Friday night, and I was here. If it had gone on the Tuesday, sir, and that was the debate if it had gone on the Tuesday, we would have never gone to ministerial government. We would have had Senator Vibert's amendment, which was small committees. So we are where we are. We limped into this, and we're still limping. Thank you, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak? Deputy St Peter.
Thank you, sir. The words I've been consistently hearing are modernisation, change, reform, democracy, constitutional change, etc. In the main, the references to what influences our change have been external, for example, the electoral observers. So if this is going to be our reference point for change, external influence, there's nothing wrong with that. But what is wrong is also taking influence from the long list of countries referred by Deputy Truscott and adopt a supermajority. So what's wrong with taking influence elsewhere? Surely it will be hypocritical for us to cherry pick who we want to listen to and ignore the other half of the equation. I'm not against change. I campaigned on it, as I'm sure you'll all recall, at the top of Bowmore Hill during election time. But change is hard work. It should involve collaboration, teamwork, open dialogue, and extensive listening and consultation with the people we are so often referring. It should involve being brave and modifying and finessing the propositions, lessons are learnt during the process. It should mean that any such changes to our assembly are thought through with compromises if necessary. So when it comes to the debate, the proposer is all but assured of success. We should not need to keep the scores as we sit here of tight votes after every speaker. The hard consultative and collaboration work should already have been done. We are talking here about the Ireland we love, the voters who gave us the privilege to represent them, and we should respect them all by being prepared to go that extra yard. A vote against this proposition is the vote of the lazy, the unconfident, or those hoping to limp over the line. I will most definitely be supporting this proposition.
Chief Minister.
Thank you, sir. I think I'm glad to be following the last speaker. I think, yes, I went to pick up in his last adjective, but anyway. I think, like other members, I too have lost track over how many debates have taken place and how many speeches I've written on reform of the State's Assembly. I think there's been on at least 2 occasions I followed Deputy Martin, much to her dismay. This is probably one of those days where she's going to be dismayed. she won't agree. But you know, we've been in here, for those of us who've been in here the longest, feels like a longish time, and there are people ahead of me who've been here longer, you do get to a point on electoral reform where sometimes you do hear things again and again and again. Well, I think I can make one claim, which very few members can claim, is that one of my propositions succeeded. And it was adopted by the then Assembly by 47 votes for, 1 abstention, and 5 people absent. And for those who cannot do the maths, that was when there were 53 members in the Assembly. And that proposition was to have all elections in any one year on the same day. It was not initially supported by the then PPC, but however their own suggestions at the time were rejected by 38 votes to 10. Now eventually my suggestions were slightly adopted, and a general election day was put in place in time for the 2011 elections, and yes, I do always claim it's my fault, unfortunately. But also note that at a time before, that great block of politicians, and I do not agree with this next description I emphasise, but that block of politicians who some claim are anti-reform, do not do anything, are an anti-democratic stain possibly upon this Assembly, i.e. the Comité de Connétables, brought a similar proposition for reform. So they did do some things, and they do things at the point I'm making. But it was a single election day for Connétables, a 4-year term. And this was originally adopted by 35 votes. Unfortunately, at that time, it fell by the wayside for other reasons. So to return to my proposition that formed the basis for the present single election day, I believe it was also used to move everyone to a 4-year term, and the one unconsidered consequence was that it was also used to remove 4 senators. So what have I learnt from that? So firstly, electoral reform is possible. Message 1. Secondly, an evolutionary approach is probably better than revolutionary. And thirdly, if the idea is workable, it will get the support of the Assembly. And the point here is that, in my view, there needs to be a clear result. The 3 examples I've just cited, 2 acceptances and 1 rejection, were 47 votes for, 35 votes for, and 38 votes against. Now that is all clearly above the threshold being proposed by Senator Farnham. And so fourthly, beware of unintended consequences. I didn't set out to remove the 4 senators, but that was what came out of the then final PPC proposals. Now I'm almost certain that one of the reasons for that proposal would have been because members were very much of the view that the public wanted fewer states members. That has been the mantra all the time I think I've been in the States. Too many politicians, waste of time, waste of money, etc., etc. And yet, as Deputy Masson often says, there is no one here who is not busy. I don't know how many people would disagree with that at the moment. I personally think at the moment that everyone is busy. And by the way, this is still the easy part of the term of office that we hold. But boy, did I get it in the neck from a huge number of parishioners for the decision to remove 4 senators. And to use the deputy of St. Juan's, that was not a sort of defined position, I think was what he was saying. And it slipped in. But the point is that this is about, how the public vote us in. And it is, to me, that is the fundamental foundation of democracy. What we are playing with is how the population, perhaps how we as individuals, not as states members, vote for the politicians who are going to represent us. That is one of the critical rights everyone on this island has. So the lesson I learned was that you mess around with who people can vote for at one's peril. And by that I mean you have to ask them. And that, to me, it has to be a clear mandate from this Assembly. That is what I mean by a clear vote. I'm just going to do that because I'm not sure if people can hear me or not, sir. Interestingly enough, the votes for a single election day and a 4-year term were each supported by over 40 votes. The move to reduce senators was 31. And I put all that in the context of 32 as being suggested by Senator Farnham. And again, I repeat, if it is sensible, this Assembly will back the change. And that is why I agree with the sentiments of Senator Farnham that his proposal would force members to work together properly, and I quote from his report, to blend their views together with the interests of islanders into properly considered, sustainable reform of our political system. That's being for democracy. That is about taking the public with us. Now look at some of the countries identified in the Senator's report. So France has a supermajority. Germany, any such law, which is about constitutional reform, shall be carried by 2/3 of the members of the Bundestag and 2/3 of the vote of the Bundesrat. Ireland, the Constitution of Ireland can only be modified by referendum. Australia, referendum. Japan, which has disappeared for some reason. Japan, amendment to this constitution shall be initiated by the Diet through a concurring vote of 2/3 or more of all the members. And these are not small countries. It demonstrates to me the importance of this issue. For politicians to decide without safeguards in place who people can vote for is, in my view, an erosion of democracy. And so I was reminded of the work that the then Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel carried out the last time electoral reform took place. And at the time, the whole thing had got very complicated. Some good work had been done in terms of seeking to understand the views of members. That was probably difficult, I suspect. But little progress had been made. And members were, and this is my recollection, were starting to jump to scenarios. But there was no real sense of where everything was going. There was no real public engagement at that particular time, i.e. close to the vote. So we as a panel ran a Murray poll. And I think it was the first since 2006, 2007. I might be wrong. The point was, it is an objective attempt to seek the views of the population. And there are two conclusions in the report to Senator Farnham's proposition, actually. One was that proposals for reform should actively engage with the public in advance of any debate. 87% of those polled desired further communication. That was a poll of around 1,000 islanders. Number two was any proposed constitutional changes should be put to a referendum in accordance with the public's wishes with a straightforward, that's the recommendation, with a straightforward yes-no answer. And I think, sorry, I'm just losing my place slightly, sir, but that was the conclusion from that Murray poll. What I think was interesting, sir, many, many years ago, the late Senator Mike Vibert proposed the present rule that we have, i.e. that any constitutional change has to have an absolute majority of the Assembly. Now, in his report, he stated that he believed matters relating to constitutional issues needed a greater safeguard than other issues coming before the states, as they allow members to make changes to how and when the public have the opportunity to elect them. And by the way, again, for, I think, the Deputy of St. Juan, it was done through standing orders. It wasn't done through primary legislation. That was the change. I assume that was the advice that was given. Now, sir, he did carry on to say that many jurisdictions require a 2/3 majority in their parliaments to approve such change. Now, at the time, he didn't think that was necessary in Jersey, partially because those other jurisdictions were party political systems. And the 2/3 majority rule was there to help constitutional changes to ensure they couldn't simply be pushed through by the party in power at any one time. Now, at that point, party politics locally wasn't really an issue. And with due deference to the senator on my left, it is a matter of debate whether it is here now, it's definitely got a root, or is it to become a significant presence? But the point is, the Assembly has changed from the time of those comments. And so, really to return to, so I'm actually just going to return to some of the comments that have been made. The timing is not right. What I will say is my understanding is this proposition was lodged before anything else that happened to come through. And I think I go back to the point. If the argument is good enough, and I can't remember who said this, sir, but it was one, might have been Deputy Tadier, might have been Deputy St. Juan, was somebody over on that side of the chamber. If the argument is good enough, it will get a good level of support. That was what somebody was using as an argument for not supporting this. Well, if the argument is good enough, and if it's going to get a good level of support, you don't have to worry about this. This will not block that change, because that member will have the support of the majority of this assembly. And it will be a clear mandate. And therefore, there will be a very clear message going to the population that this has the full support or the significant support of this assembly.
So would the Chief Minister give way?
No, sir.
That was my
but Deputy Ward, for example, said, sorry, so I'm trying to read my own handwriting, which is not particularly good. Oh, yes, Deputy Ward talked about, when he was speaking, knocking on the door, and talked about his role and things like that and how it might have been changed. What he missed, the point was, sir, I think, is that I suspect his parishioners would be far less happy if the role he is fulfilling, i.e. as a deputy of St Helier, had been taken away by a 24-25 vote split, with no recourse to the public, and no recourse, and just by a very, very small change in this assembly. Because that is what we're talking about for St Mary's, potentially, or St Lawrence, or St Juan's even, with super constituencies and things like that that come through. And so, where is that democratic buy-in? Because if we take away the voting ability of that electorate, where does that leave them? And so, to return to the theme of supermajorities, for example, when one changes the Memorandum and Articles of Association, which is the constitution of a company, it usually requires a special resolution of members. That's usually a 75% majority. But that is also there to protect the rights of the minority. And you actually get into this expression, in fact, if we think about it, is why we have the Troy rule. It's to actually, I think it's to avoid what's sometimes called the tyranny of the majority. It's to give minority protection. And bluntly, if it's good enough from the smallest company to the biggest company, from, say, a plumber to an international conglomerate, if it is good enough for some of the, I'm going to say, the biggest democracies on the planet, why shouldn't it be good enough for our islanders? Why should we not put those safeguards in place to ensure that not only good decisions are made, but to protect the underlying grassroots of the electorate? That's not an affront to democracy. That's about democracy. And it is a difficult decision. I can see some people nodding. I can see some people shaking their heads in despair. But we often get accused of losing contact with the public outside, of living in a bubble in this chamber. And I will have to say, I've not had anyone beating on my door in the last month, 2 months, whatever, talking about electoral reform or talking about removal of the bailiff, other than to say, for goodness sake, haven't you got better things to do? It's around the hospital, it's around mental health, it's around population, it's around housing. And so if we talk about public engagement at that stage on both of those, on the subject, whether it's the bailiff or whether it's the things that Deputy Labby wants to bring through, I don't think the public are that tuned into it at this stage. If you want to say something, what's the most important thing beginning with B, I think it would have an X in it and sound like Brexit. It won't be the bailiff. And so the more time we spend on this, the less time we have to address those other issues. I remind members actually, I spent, I think, 12 to 14 hours working very constructively with Deputy Ward, with Senator Mesick, with the Commissioner for Children, with the Attorney General, to coming to a compromise on that Children's Commissioner law. That's the proper work we should be doing. The more time we spend on effectively talking by ourselves, the less time we have in other areas, because the consequences that do come out of the Assembly, they trickle down everywhere within the organisation, and they divert resources elsewhere. So what this does, this forces members to work together to come to something which has a pretty good chance of going through. And I remind members, as I said at the very, very beginning, if I can actually find my spot, the original proposals that, for example, I put through were 47 votes for and I think 35 votes poor. Oddly enough, the senators was less. So, in my view, I reiterate, it is when you're dealing with constitutional change, when you're dealing with the ability and the rights, the existing rights of islanders as to how they vote us into this assembly, we've got to have proper safeguards in place before we start changing them. And that includes making sure you can give a clear view here and that you're engaging with the public outside. For all of those reasons, I am supporting Senator Varnum. Thank you, sir.
Senator Moore.
Thank you, sir. I hadn't intended to speak, so I will be brief. But the irony of the previous speaker's comments with regards to referenda didn't escape my attention. We, as an Assembly, I'm afraid, due to a previous Assembly's vote in 2014, I believe, have a very poor record in terms of listening to the public and actually listening to a referendum that was publicly held and engaged with by our community, only to see the Estates Assembly of that time vote against it. So, sir, one has to practice what one preaches, and we simply are in a sad state of affairs where we haven't got public confidence. And I do agree with the Senator in saying that they would much prefer we made a decision about the hospital than continued with a debate such as this one.
Sir, point of clarification, I made reference to a yes-no clear referendum, sir.
Senator Varnum.
Thank you, sir. I was just going to stand to speak very briefly, but after last few couple of speakers, I feel that I have to maybe go a little bit further than what I was intending to. It's not very often I get infuriated by some of the debates in this States Assembly, but there are only so many times you can go through the same arguments and hear the same answers and get sick and tired of it. And I think I'm merely expressing what I think many of the public feel. I've lost count of the amount of debates I've had on electoral reform and the bailiff and the traditions that we have in the island. And the Deputy St Peter talks about an external influence with regards to the commissioners coming over. Well, Clothier report 19 years ago was an external influence. Majority of that panel were from here. And that made recommendations for us to change. And when we talk about compromises, I'm all for compromises, but thinking having this will make us work better together, and I respect the Deputy St Peter, but it's complete naivety. I've been in the States Assembly for 10 years and tried working with people time and time again. But if people are ingrained in a particular view and are not willing to open their eyes to the modern 21st century that we are living in, then we are never going to change. And I have to make that point now because I respect our traditions. I'm a Jersey person. I was born here. My family were born here. And it's not about staying in a particular way of doing things. It's about respecting those traditions, taking them with us, and making something better and improved. Having a supermajority, in my view, and this was what I was hoping to come to this with a kind of compromise to Senator Farnham, because I was going to say, Senator Farnham, Constitution. Let's have a written constitution. Bring that constitution to this States Assembly. Let's debate it. Let's write it down. Let's codify it as an island of Jersey, and then have the debate on a supermajority. Let's do that before we decide that we have 2/3 of this Assembly deciding on the electoral reform. I mean, does the Constitution mean machinery of government? Does constitutional reform mean ministerial government? Because if that's the case, then I'm sorry, but I think we need a serious conversation about how ministerial government works and the reflection to how the public expect us to work on their behalf. The references to all the other countries, they have party politics. Majority of this Assembly are independent members. There's a reason why we have a simple majority. We have a right to say and represent the people that we've been elected by. I've been a deputy of St Saviour's, I've been a deputy of St John's, and now I'm a senator. I listened to the people that I represented. I tried to work very hard on their behalf, and I continue to do that on an island-wide basis. But I did that as a deputy as well. You have to listen to everybody. It's not just about the single area that you're in. And I believe that the constables do that too. They listen to their parishioners. They try to work with their parishioners. But the point is, we're all here for the same objective. So for me, having... And the references to more, the various different amounts of votes that have been had over electoral reform over the past so many years, the reason why there were so many votes for some of those amendments that were made for a general election day and all those areas was the PPC of the time referred to a Mori poll that was made in 2007. The public wanted a general election day. So this States Assembly actually listened to them. That's an example. We actually listened to them. But you see, the difference is that we're not like every other country. We're not like every other area. We do have independence in this island in terms of politics. Some believe that's bad. And some believe that we need a political party structure. But if you look at the way the rest of the world's going, I have to question it. I mean, I respect the fact that the Reform Party have put themselves together and worked together and tried to make a difference. I absolutely respect that. But I also look at the rest of the world and see the way that, all they do is ego fighting in terms of political parties in other jurisdictions, rather than actually getting to the nub of the problem and trying to work together. But I go back to the point, is the naivety of believing just by having a supermajority vote will get us to work together more closely and achieve an outcome. I'm sorry, after my experience, I'd suggest that is not realistic. Because there are certain areas that people will not go to. There are certain areas that people will not step over, no matter how factual, no matter how logical. And that's the point. On that basis, sir, my view is that I will not be supporting this amendment to standing orders. And I would consider it more constructively if we were to consider it on the back of having a written constitution agreed by the States Assembly so that everyone knows where they stand, what the constitution means, and it's not based on assumption.
So, the point of order, I feel I may have accidentally misled the Assembly because when I spoke I said it takes 19 people to vote against constitutional change to stop it. Actually, the figure is 17 members to stop it. I do apologise.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Ash.
Thank you, sir. I agree with the Chief Minister that there are many, many important issues that we have to discuss, much more important than some of the issues we discuss. But this is about the very root of democracy. This is about changing the amount of people we need to vote in here to carry something. In the past, it's always been the majority. 25, 24, that's good enough. So we are actually changing the fundamental principles of a vote in here. It smacks really, and I don't want to be too flippant about the issue, but there used to be a Blackadder sketch where they had a rotten borough, one voter, and he got elected with 16,000 votes. But that's not 100% different from some of the stuff that goes on here. We need two-thirds of a majority is what we're looking for in here. And I don't mean to knock the constables because I like them and I think they fulfill a great role. Some of them are, and you can look at it either way, elected with 0% of the vote or 100% of the vote. I don't know which way you want to cut that, but that's how it works. So there are things we do need to look at. And it's not as easy to say, well, if we're going to look at it, let's have a 2/3 of a vote. Now, this is a big issue, I think. I do think it's a big issue, reforming our political system and making it more democratic. And others may disagree, but I think it is. Just because something is a big issue does not mean we have to change a voting rule. The abolition of slavery was a very big issue. Votes for women was a very big issue. But I don't recall the House of Commons saying, well, we're going to change it so we have a 2/3 majority on this one. So I will definitely be opposing this.
Deputy Southern.
And today is indeed a strange day. yet again, I'm about to agree with Deputy Ash. And this time, I was even more impressed by the accuracy and focus of the points he made. He was absolutely right. And his stance on this proposition is absolutely spot on. We shouldn't be voting for this. And I've been in this House for more years than I care to remember. In this Assembly, yes. Apart from Constable Norman and Deputy Martin, I'm the longest serving, long in the tooth deputy. And I have to say that I've met this before. This is an old trick from Senator Farnham. He's tried it before. He's tried lots of ways to ensure that his branch of conservatism, with a small c, maintains sway in this House, in this Assembly. I keep making that mistake. And I object to the argument presented by our Chief Minister today when he says, and let's look at the words, he says, any sensible proposition will command a majority. Let's have a debate on what is sensible, shall we? Shall we try that? Let's see if we can actually get 49 different versions of what is sensible to do. I think we probably could. 49 people in this room, 49 opinions. What is sensible? Sensible. Like they use the word common sense. If it's common sense, it'll get through. No, it won't. I've been in this House 17 years. Sensible in this Assembly. See? I'm a slow learner. And sensible will take 49 ways. What we are facing here is what used to be called, or can be called, a wrecking amendment. This is designed to block any change whatsoever. That's why it's there. Now, you might think, you might have an opinion on what you think is sensible for the numbers in this House. In this Assembly. Keep doing this is Assembly. I'd have to read that. In this Assembly. So what we're looking at, and it doesn't matter how you regard this particular Assembly, if you think that it's so perfect that we should never amend the Constitution, we'd never change the representation, never change the numbers, if you think that this is heaven already on earth, then vote for this proposition. Because with these sort of numbers, we'll never get any change, whatever direction you want this Assembly to move in. We will never get any change. Look at the numbers. It only requires 17 members to vote one way to block any change. That is not very many. Are we going to be stuck? Are we going to have stasis forever, the next 200 years or beyond? A perfect institution in this Assembly? I doubt it. And I hope that most of the people in this Assembly would agree with me. The possibility of no change is not one that we should be contemplating. For example, we've talked about the way in which PPC is about to attempt to make one particular change. And its motivator is the principle of fairness, the principle of equality. And it's suggesting a move towards equal votes of equal value. As was reported back to us, would be the way to move if we were going to improve our democracy and improve our representation in this assembly. Now, if you're saying we shouldn't even be considering that, and I want to make sure that it doesn't happen, then all you need is 16 of your mates. And you can stop it. I ask you, is that a democracy? Is that a democratic way to behave? I don't believe it is. What is the magic number? 33 votes to get any change whatsoever. 17 can knock it on the head. That is not fair. That is not right. And that is not democracy. Whatever number that those in there, what should it be? Should it be 40, 42, 44? A number that we need to achieve any change? I don't believe so. And perhaps most appropriately, and personally for me, when I meet my constituents, what's the most often thing they most often say to me as to why they vote for me? Well, increasingly, recently, it's because I'm a party member and they know where my vote's going. But previous to that, they used to say things like, I don't agree with the thing you stand for. I don't agree with one of your policies, but I'll vote for you because you're a stirrer. You stir them up, you get them going. And I love it when I hear that. And I assure members that with my reputation as a stirrer, I wouldn't let my constituents down. And rather than all gathering behind these 33 votes that we need to change anything, 17 votes to block it, and working together, compromise, to get solutions in terms of constitution, I won't be sitting there doing nothing. If we vote for this today, I can guarantee that on a regular basis, once every 6 months, I'll bring some amendments about how we're organised, about what our numbers are, about who represents whom in this House, and I'll continue to do it ad nauseum. Why? Because I'm doing it on behalf of my constituents and not on behalf of the members here. The people who vote for me deserve better than this over-respect that we have for where do we stand in this chamber. We stand to represent our voters. And that's enough. That's enough for me. 33 votes, 17 votes, blocking.
Deputy Moran.
Oh, no, sir, I didn't want to speak except to ask how many people do you have down to speak? And so I was going to suggest we seek to kind of guillotine this debate.
Until you said it, no.
In which case I'll sit down, sir.
But I now have the Constable of St John, Deputy Pamplin and Deputy Pershars.
Move for guillotine motion.
Okay, that's accepted. So it's a half hour from now, and then the question will be put. Constable of St John.
Thank you, sir. We, the people, as the chair of PPC said earlier, was the first 3 words, or is the first 3 words, of the American Constitution. Yet we've never listened to our people, have we? No referendum has ever been adopted by this Assembly. And when we did agree to a referendum in the last sitting, it was thrown out last July. Oh no, we know better than our people. And we've just had a speech from Deputy Southern about how he represents his constituency.
And if he has faith in that, then a referendum would be the correct and the right way forward. I see some members shake their heads, but I will go back to the original question. Why are we in this assembly? We are here to represent our parishioners. And therefore, we should always be prepared to welcome a referendum. But for some reason, that just doesn't work. And so we need to have another mechanism to ensure when we want to change the Constitution, we do so with a degree of consistency, a degree of security, a degree of certainty. That's it. We have had in this assembly a motion carried due to a ring binder. Imagine if that ring binder was to change our Constitution. Sir, some people think it's funny. I don't. This is a serious matter. This is how we represent our constituencies, how we represent our islanders. And we should do so in a secure and consistent manner. Consistent doesn't mean not changing. It means evolution, not revolution. And that is what is so important. And by having a 2/3 majority of 32, this requires evolution and it stamps out revolution. So I urge members to support this because it is the correct way forward. Thank you.
Deputy Pamplin.
Thank you, sir. I bow to the superior knowledge of time experience in this assembly by Deputy Southern, Deputy Martin and others. But what I will bring to this debate is a member who's close to reaching his first year in this glorious role. The point here is very simple. We talk about fine lines and we talk about fine margins. The reality of everyday and real life is it's not straightforward. Sometimes life comes down to those tiny decisions that cause great ripples. Or let's talk about an analogy we could all understand. Football. The current Premier League is coming down to the wire. It may end up by 1 point. If Manchester City win the league by 1 point, does that mean Liverpool should have won the league? They came that close. We can't, let's do the whole league again. Sometimes you have to accept the fine margins. If that goal had gone in, if that referee decision had gone that way, and we sit in the bars and pubs at home and we argue, but ultimately we just come to a decision, it was close, but we accept it. Now we talk about referendums, and I think we're missing something here, because in the reality of outside, the referendum that was recently held in Great Britain is not a great example of where we're talking about evolution of politics. That was close. That was fine margins. We could debate the numbers. We could debate how it was held, sir. I mean, we could do that all day. But the point is, a referendum was held. That is a complex, complicated decision. Facts were not properly aligned. People didn't know which way they were going about it. And when you talk to people in everyday life, they get it. They understand that life is not straightforward sometimes, and sometimes things just are that close. But if we are working together, and I believe we are, I've only been in this assembly, sir, as I say, nearly a year. I've seen this assembly do great things already. I've seen political boundaries come across. I've worked with Deputy Ward very hard on the Children's Commissioner. I'm not a member of Reform Jersey. I've had conversations with the government, sometimes I've disagreed with. I had a lovely lunch with the Constable St John. The point is we do work together because I believe, and the Senator said it himself, this is a new assembly. He's right. That's evolution. Look around us all. We are different, we are changing, we're evolving. Every single one of us new members who stood for election and succeeded, we are different, we are changing, but we respect tradition, but we want to work together. We don't need to be forced to work together. We're doing that already, and we will do because we believe in why we're here. And we will continue to do that. So I believe this is a moment right now for all of us really to think about this moment as new members. This is the time when we say, not now, trust each other, hold each other to account, and trust the public. If we improve our engagement with the public, if we improve the way we go about our business, if we're more polite but earnest, if we engage better with the public, try new things, do new things, the public are getting better. They're getting it. They see the change. We cannot let them down at this moment. So when we get to the next election, I promise you now there will be a change. It's in our hands. It's in this moment now. So new members and all of us, let's say no to this proposition. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Pershard.
Thank you, sir. I was pleased to hear the Chief Minister mention democratic buy-in and the Constable Taylor state that we have to listen to our parishioners. One of the most valued aspects of our own system is the ability to do just that, to listen to our own parishioners and have our own independence of thought in response to their needs and their demands. Even the political party that we do have in our assembly conducts itself in a unique and I would say better way than parties elsewhere, due to the fact that they allow its members independence of thought on votes beyond their core manifesto. The vast majority of us are independent politicians, but all of us, including the members of Reform, maintain independence of thought. All of the jurisdictions presented in Senator Farnham's report have a system of party politics that functions very differently from our own system of mostly independents and from our own individual party. A supermajority, therefore, is needed in those instances to prevent the dominant group just pushing through all of their legislation. Are we in this position? No. Do we therefore need this system of a supermajority? No, we don't. I wasn't intending to speak at this debate, and I am quite pleased that the deputy behind me has brought the guillotine motion, because I really did think most members would see this as quite an obvious fact. We don't have that kind of party politics. We don't have that kind of system or structure around us to require a supermajority. Therefore, we do not need to pass this amendment to standing orders. And for me, it's purely a question of the structure we have and the proposition that's being posed not fitting together. Thank you, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak in the debate? If not, I call Senator Farnham.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. And thank you to all who have spoken in this important debate. And I think it's been a worthwhile debate. It's a conversation that I feel we had to have. I'm also grateful to the Solicitor General for his advice and confirmations that were raised from questions by Deputy Morrell and Deputy Wickenden. But I'm going to start with Deputy Russell Abbey, who didn't disappoint again today with his contribution. And again, he started on the technical issues. But I just wanted to make that point clear, and I did in my opening speech, and a number of members have talked about the constitutions. I mean, Jersey doesn't have a written constitution. We have parts of our constitution is written, and parts are historic, and whether a Senator Valois says we decide to take on that task and do something about that in the future, well, that's a conversation for another day. But I was very I tried to be very specific to explain that, so that issue didn't become a bit of a diversion in this debate. So I can't remember all of the colourful adjectives that the deputy used, but and I can't even reckless abandonment were sort of one of the phrases which was very good. But I still maintain that this proposition is the opposite of that, because there has been no action. We've tried, but there's been no action. When we work together, we succeed. When we don't, when we present a disparate view or disparate propositions, we fail. Because we're all stubborn, we've all got our own views, and some of us can't change, or won't. There's no such word. Can't, cannot, will not. Some of us will not change. But when we work together, those very few of us that will not change fall into a very small minority. It's not an insult to democracy. This is just the opposite. What is an insult to democracy is when this assembly carries through propositions that are simply not reflective of the public's views in relation to their democracy. That is the affront to democracy that my proposition is attempting to address. I mean, when Deputy Labby, and we're good friends, I hope we will remain good friends throughout the next few state sittings, came to talk to the Council of Ministers on that fateful day. It wasn't a consultation. Deputy Labby came to present his proposition, to inform us of his proposition, and say, well, maybe we could throw in half a dozen senators, you know, just to sort of get this over the line, or something like that, which is fine, but that's not the kind of collaboration we need to move forward. Senator Ferguson made some very valid points, but on the American the constitution of their democracy, and especially in relation to the Senate. But those, I think, are conversations that are going to come up when we talk about voter representation. But I thank her for that. And I also thank the Constable of St Martin for her support. She has clearly thought carefully about this and engaged with her parishioners and reminded us that it's not about us or our agendas or our ambitions, it's about the people we represent. Now, Deputy Wickenden. Here I am quaking in my boots. He said that I was scared of reform, scared of change. Well, I think my record speaks against that, because I've tried to protect the island against poor reform, and I've brought amendments to propositions to introduce elements, for example, super constituencies that I am uncomfortable with, but have supported that to find compromise. But he is right insofar as I am scared of something, and that is I'm scared of poor reform. I'm scared that this assembly, in its haste to reform, because it will make us look, you know, modern and positive, which I believe we generally are, but in order to appease the public, we might rush through the wrong reform. That's what scares me. Senator Mezek, as always, gave a very eloquent speech, and he talked about, he was the first member to introduce the veto of the minority in this assembly. But actually, if you do research on why there are supermajorities in some jurisdictions and some countries, not all countries, American states have supermajorities to change the makeup of their state legislatures, for example. And they do that so to protect the democratic rights of the individual, and within the democratic rights of the individuals. There are a lot of minority groups. And it's the protection of the rights of those people, which is one of the reasons why supermajorities exist. Senator Mezek also said that he did not think this was a constitutional issue, and this may be a discussion for another day. But as it stands at the moment, it is a constitutional issue in as far as we're referring to the Constitution of the States of Jersey and the Constitution of the States Assembly. I also thank Deputy Gida, because he also spoke of the importance of communication with the electorate, which we have spectacularly failed to do in the past, but we must not fail to do that in the future. Whatever path or whatever journey we're going on with our reform, we must bring the electorate with us. That is essential. And we should have learned. I'll come on to that. We've had 2 referendums, and there are lessons to be learnt. Deputy Renouf, Deputy St. Juan raised more technical issues. The Constable of St. Peter talked again about the will of the people, and that's a theme that a lot of people talked about, but I was particularly interested to hear about his conversations with the Swiss ambassador. I'm not suggesting we look at doing it how they do it, but it's certainly important that we do engage with other politicians from around the world and discuss these issues to gain a better understanding. Deputy Tadier said that people were saying some extraordinary things, and he went on to say some even more extraordinary things. But I do understand his sentiment. You see, I think that the bigger the state's majority that we have, the more reflective that will be of the electorate. I think this assembly is representative of the electorate. You see, it's made up, as it is, with deputies, constables and senators for a very good reason. We go back to some I'm not sure, I'll come to that, but it was raised by a member, our constitutional change of 1948. And we are constituted as we are because we are a single assembly. There are no councils, no devolved assemblies, no super constituency assemblies, there's no upper house. There's a states assembly. We are the sole legislature of the island. And that's why we have 3 tiers of states member. We have deputies to represent their constituencies, and Deputy Southern made some valid points on that, and I'll come back to that in a minute. The constables represent the parishes and the local government functions that the parishes carry out. And the senators, to create balance, represent the small national interest. There are no boundaries on the island-wide mandate. But of course, as a number of members have said, they work for their constituents in their districts, which is right. But we need the blend of the different members to provide that balance and that fairness. And I think it's worked pretty well. The Deputy of St Mary raised the issues around the removal of the senators. He's quite right to raise that, because that, as the Chief Minister referred to, did cause a lot of concern among islanders. It seemed to be an arbitrary move at the time to do that. There was no consultation. We didn't get the permission of the electorate. And I don't think we've ever been forgiven for that. And I also want to thank Deputy Truscott for his contribution. Deputy Truscott and other members have worked closely and been supportive and helpful to me on putting this proposition together. I just want to return to the Deputy of St Martin, who always speaks wise words. And his comments on a slim majority were well made, and that does work both ways. And I think he said it would be ironic if we lost or won by a single vote. Well, of course, what this proposition is seeking to do is change the standing orders of the states which relate to elected states members, boundaries, number of states members, etc. They don't relate to needing a supermajority to change a standing order. And he also spoke about the timing. And the timing, when we were putting this together, I had no idea about Deputy Laby's proposition. I had a feeling that there was one coming on the bailiff, but it was relatively quiet. But could see storm clouds gathering. But it wasn't tabled. It wasn't tabled because there were propositions coming. It's just a happy coincidence that it was. But I thank the Deputy of St Martin for his helpful contribution. Deputy of St Peter completely understands the proposition, and the Chief Minister reminded us that one piece of reform, many members, I think most members will think it was a good piece of reform. We must have got that by accident, but it was to have the single true election day. Unfortunately, I think we put the cart before the horse, because actually we should have agreed on the makeup of the Assembly before we're agreeing on how we elect them, but we did it the other way around. We agreed that we were going to elect the whole Assembly on one day, and then we tried to turn it around to fit everybody into that, which is why we lost, I think, the 4 senators at that time. And Senator Moore talked about referenda and chastised, I think, some of us for not listening to the result of the referendum in, I think it was 2012 or 2013, when Deputy Labby and many of us teammates on the option A, B and C campaign, and we had a referendum in between elections, which led to a very, very poor turnout. But we made the mistake of not listening to the result of that, and I think we've learned from that, and we should never not listen to the result of a referendum by the people of Jersey again. We've learned a lesson. But then I will be interested to hear I shall be watching closely how Senator Moore is going to vote on retaining the constables, given that we had a solid referendum vote to keep the constables in 2014. So while she chastises us for not listening to the referendum 2013, I hope she will listen to the result of the referendum relating to the constables. And Senator Valois, she thinks this proposition is naive, but I don't take that in the wrong way. She's always passionate about her work and her views. And I would just say to Senator Valois, sir, that whilst taking on board what she said, is that the simple trying to reform this Assembly with a simple majority has just not worked. It just hasn't worked. And if it does work, I'm worried that we're going to get the wrong reform through. Because once we change, it's going to be very difficult to go back. Once we lose some of the things we have, and you never really appreciate things until you lose them, then I think they're gone for good. Because reform tends to stay in the same, it tends to stay in the same direction. It's difficult to reel it back in. And I was just also, Deputy Ash, very good speaker. I enjoy his speeches. I didn't enjoy that one. But he spoke about democracy. And, what is democracy? Democracy is about protecting the democratic rights of the individuals. And I've said it 3 or 4 times, and I'm going to keep saying it because that is what must be at the forefront of our ambitions when it comes to reform. Deputy Southern said this with another old trick, but I will accept being conservative with a small c. I take that as a compliment from Deputy Southern. But it's not designed to block change. It simply isn't. Members will say that because it's an easy rebuff, isn't it? It's an easy argument to make that this is going to block change, but it's not. It will do the opposite. How many more examples do you need of the states of Jersey and members in this assembly when they put their mind to it and have to work together with scrutiny and with ministers and with the government and with other members? It is achievable on all sorts of issues that many of us are miles and miles apart on. We find consensus and compromise all the time. And you know what? If we support this, we will do the same with this. If we support this proposition, I will guarantee that this assembly will be bringing reform much sooner than if we don't. But it will be bringing the right reform, and it will be bringing a reform that is acceptable. Whether some of us like it or not, will be bringing reform that is acceptable to the majority of the people of this island. Councillor St John spoke about the importance of the stability of our political system and the importance of evolution, not revolution. And I referred to that in my opening remarks, that the stability of our island over the recent decades has been the backbone, has been the platform of which we've developed our success. Deputy Pamplin, again, gave one of his another good speaker, but compared this to a football result. And I'm not being flippant. I know what you were trying to say, but this is really serious. This is really important. Reform, it's a big deal. It's not a done deal. It's a big deal. It's a big deal for a lot of people because this is going to impact on future generations. And Deputy Pershard, again, I'm grateful for her contribution, but she spoke again about the importance of listening to our parishioners. And that's a common thread that's been brought up by members from both sides of this argument. Everybody is in agreement that we must listen to islanders and to our constituents and to our parishioners. And that's what I appeal to members to do today, especially the minority groups in those communities. So, it's a struggle, sir, to reform the Assembly, and it will continue to be a struggle. But the virtue, I say, sir, lies in the struggle, not necessarily the prize. The virtue will lie in the struggle and the efforts that we take together to bring good reform. I don't know what the prize is going to look like, and it's not going to be a simple prize because reform has to evolve and it has to be evolutionary. And members have said it's proved impossible to reform, and if we adopt this proposition, it's going to be impossible to bring any reform in the future. Well, sir, the difference between the impossible and the possible will lie in the determination of this Assembly. And if this Assembly is determined to bring reform, then it will be determined to work together to deliver that reform in the way that the people of Jersey can accept and will want. And it's our duty, sir, to work together and to listen to them. Thank all members once again for participating, sir. And if there are no questions, I would like to ask for the appeal. Thank you.
Panel has been called for. Members are all in their seats. So I ask the greffier to open the voting. Members have had the opportunity to cast their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. And I can see that the proposition has been rejected. 24 votes contra, 22 pro and 1 abstention.
Those voting for are Senators Farnham, Ferguson and Le Fondre, the Connétables of St Lawrence, St Saviour, St Brelard, Grouville, St John, Trinity, St Peter, St Mary, St Juan and St Martin, Deputies Lewis, Pinnell, St Martin, Truscott, Ash, Guida, St Peter, Trinity and Le Hégara. Those voting contre, Senators Valois, Moore and Mezek, the Connétables of St Helier and St Clement, and Deputies Martin, Southern, Grouville, Tadier, Higgins, St Juan, Doublé, Labby, Wickenden, St Mary, Young, Morel, St John, Ayer, Pershard, Ward, Alves, Pamplin and Gardner, and Senator Pallett abstained.
Okay.
Sir?
Deputy Ash.
Could I just say, and it wasn't a ring binder, but I did press the wrong button.
So did the other 21, sir.
So we now move on to P31, elected Speaker and Deputy Speaker of the State Assembly selection and appointments, which has been lodged by Senator Mezek. I would normally ask the Deputy Greffier to read the proposition, but it's quite long, and I'm sure you've all read it. So I think we'll move straight on and ask Senator Mezek to introduce the proposition.
Thank you, sir. Now the real fun begins, of course. I can feel the room bursting with excitement. And everyone gets up to leave, of course. But we ought to be excited because today could be a historic day for Jersey. This could be the culmination of one of Jersey's greatest and oldest traditions in action, which is that long-standing Jersey tradition of agitating for democracy. Because for hundreds of years, various groups of islanders have come and gone which have agitated for democratic reform. In the 1700s, hundreds of islanders regularly took direct action, including storming the Royal Court building next door to demand reforms which actually led to this State's Assembly becoming the primary lawmaking body of the island, which was a crucial step towards becoming a parliamentary democracy. In the 1800s, there were the great pamphleteers who campaigned and petitioned for direct representation in the states, which led to deputies being introduced. And eventually, it even led to secret ballots being introduced decades after they were adopted elsewhere. And before then, elections were done by a show of hands, and people were regularly kidnapped and dropped at the ecrios if they were known to be voters for the less favourable candidate. Then in the 1900s, there was the campaign for women's suffrage. And after that, the campaign for a salary for states members so working class people could afford to serve the island. And these campaigns have been a key part of our history, without which our island would look very different, and I would contend look much worse. And throughout all of that time, some in the island have pushed for a separation of powers, and bit by bit, some separation has been achieved. And if members accept this proposition unamended, we can complete that part of the journey and join the rest of the modern democratic world and claim the right to project our democracy to the outside world in the same way we do our finance industry. We can be the democracy that we should all be aspiring for Jersey to be, and become a sovereign assembly which determines its own future and processes. And in preempting what will no doubt be said in this debate, let me be clear about this point, that there is absolutely nothing anti-Jersey about this aspiration. The basic principles of the separation of powers, of human rights and of democracy are not incompatible with Jersey culture and heritage just because we've had hundreds of years of history without these principles. In fact, these principles are essential if we want to preserve our autonomy and preserve what is special about Jersey, because if things are going to stay the same in Jersey, then things are going to have to change. And this is not any sort of slavish adherence to an obscure and extreme doctrine. This matters because it's more than just theory. It's about what practical effect it has on our rights as Jersey people. But even if it was just about theory, there's plenty of it to go by. We have the Bangalore Principles of Judicial Conduct. We have the Latimer House Principles. We've got the CPA benchmarks for democratic legislatures. And there are absolutely no impartial authorities which defend the current system, not one. But forgetting the theory, this is why it matters practically. All of us in Jersey have to live with the consequences of the decisions which are made by the different branches of government, and we depend upon them to make good decisions. Democracy is fragile, and it can be lost. Just look at countries like Brazil, Hungary and Turkey, which used to be democracies, but are losing it because of the authoritarians who are taking power there. And people can have their lives destroyed when things go wrong in the state. The systems we have to abide by the rule of law and work to uphold our rights. And it's essential that there are safeguards in place to ensure that there is accountability. The three branches of government must be able to hold one another to account, not just from one branch going rogue, but because honest and decent people can sometimes make mistakes, and these mistakes may have dire consequences on individuals. Those individuals have got to be able to rely on each branch of government to defend them from the other branches. If a court interprets a law badly, the Parliament must be able to pass legislation to fix it. If Parliament proposes something unconstitutional or against human rights, the public must have recourse to an independent tribunal to uphold their rights. And right now in Jersey, people do not have this ability because the Parliament and the courts are led by the same person. And this isn't trivial. It might be trivial if you don't care about it, or if it's something that will never affect you, but it's fundamental if you want to live in a democratic society. And this perspective has been examined and endorsed several times before at the behest of the states. We've had the Clothier report, we've had the Carswell report, and most recently the Independent Jersey Care Inquiry, all of whom have said the exact same thing, and every single future review that we may undertake will say the same again, because the findings are timeless. But the one review that I want to focus on now is the report from the Constitutional Review Group, which was published in 2008, because that's actually the most interesting report and probably the one that's been read the least. The Constitutional Review Group was actually requested by the states to investigate the viability and the implications of Jersey becoming independent from the UK. It was chaired by the then bailiff, Philip Balash, and the vice chair was the then Attorney General, who is now the current bailiff, William Balash. Their report said that in the event of Jersey becoming an independent country, the dual role of the bailiff would be completely inappropriate and would have to change. That was said by the then bailiff and the current bailiff. What they said the current system is okay so long as we remain a Crown dependency. Isn't that interesting? You have to ask yourself, why? Why would a separation of powers be essential for an independent Jersey but not a Crown dependency Jersey? And I think I've figured out the answer to this. I think it's because, as things stand, Jersey residents currently have the option of going to the UK courts to have their rights upheld. How strange it is that Jersey, proud of its local identity, proud of its autonomy, is seemingly also proud to say that we aren't good enough in our local institutions to uphold our rights. We have to rely on external courts. Because Jersey justice isn't good enough, we have to have English justice. That was a decade ago. What's happened since? If that position was strange in 2008, then it's got to be even stranger in 2019. Look at the backdrop we have today. There are forces in the UK which want to move away from the established position over generations, which is that the UK doesn't interfere in internal Jersey affairs without our consent. Their focus now is on beneficial ownership, but it could move elsewhere too. And those calls will become louder if we show ourselves to be incapable of reforming ourselves. And the risk now is greater than it has ever been. And for evidence of this, we don't need to look far. In fact, you can see it on a clear day from St. Juan. It's called Sark. Sark remained the last feudal jurisdiction in Europe. Its parliament was packed with landowners and lords, and justice was dished out at the whim of the unaccountable. It was forced to change. But even when they themselves produced options for reform that moved to an elected chamber, they opted to retain the dual role of the seneschal, who was their equivalent of bailiff, as both Speaker and Chief Justice. The reform legislation they produced was then challenged in the UK courts by the Berkeley brothers, who I'll freely admit are not exactly the best mascots for this cause. In the Court of Appeal in the UK, the case of the Berkeley brothers against the Secretary of State for Justice, they ruled that the dual role was unacceptable. And here is what they said in that judgment. They said, the law must provide a structure in which those who do or who may come before the court can be confident in the independence and impartiality of the judge. Given the seneschal's position provided by Section 5 of the Reform Law, provision for the law for the appointment of deputies and lieutenants, giving the seneschal the power to recuse himself, though constructive and advantageous in itself, does not rectify the situation. The position of the seneschal, sitting alone, constituting the sole court of justice in Sark, in my view, falls on the wrong side of what is convention compliance. That's a reference to the European Convention on Human Rights. And Sark now has an elected speaker. And I believe one day Jersey will have one too, but for our island's sake, I hope we get there ourselves without external interference. And so I freely admit that I understand why some aren't enthusiastic about this change, because with any change comes uncertainty, and people who care about Jersey don't want to see anything get worse. But I have to say, I think some of the arguments against are spurious. One obvious red herring is what has been said about the role of the bailiff as the civic head of the island, and how this would allegedly undermine that part of his role. And I think there are two important things to say to that. The first is that the role of the bailiff predates the existence of the States of Jersey, and it predates the supremacy of the States Assembly by hundreds of years. The second is that actually nobody has ever chosen the bailiff to be the civic head of the island. He just has that title because he just does. My proposition, for the first time in our history, actually asks our elected representatives to endorse that position. And how can that do anything other than strengthen his role as the civic head of the island, for it to be endorsed for the first time in history by this Assembly, as I hope all members will choose to do. The second red herring is that this would somehow undermine his role as the guardian of the Constitution. And I think it's so important to correct this, because it's so wrong and betrays a complete lack of understanding of what the Constitution is or how this role is actually carried out. The simple fact of the matter is that the role of guardian of the Constitution arises out of the bailiff's role of Chief Justice of the island, not as Speaker of the Assembly. It is in a court of law that the Constitution would be defended. And I have got both the former bailiff and the Attorney General to admit in this Assembly that the practical actions of the guardian of the Constitution that they have to undertake do not occur on the floor of this chamber. From that seat, the bailiff has no power whatsoever to defend our Constitution. He defends it in court when government actions, which may be ultra vires, or a law is passed which contravenes the Constitution. It's in a court that that redress would be sought, not on the floor of this Assembly. What this proposition does is it frees both the court and the Assembly to do our jobs more effectively. Now, I didn't actually write this proposition. I'm happy to admit it was a clear case of plagiarism from a previous proposition brought by the previous Chief Minister. But what it does is it provides the framework for an elected Speaker to take office upon the retirement of the current bailiff and to hit the ground running. The Speaker will be elected either from amongst States members or a member of the public, whichever we choose. The Speaker will be required to be impartial in the chair, but outside they will be partisan in support of this institution, its privileges and its processes. They will undertake the work that the bailiff cannot do now because he's tied up with court work. They will be able to go out into wider society to facilitate engagement with our democracy, with civic society, with charities, with businesses, to help them understand how our system works and how society can get involved. And my goodness, don't we need more of that? And I think that when politics is held in such low regard, when there is frankly so much ignorance out there about how we work, to have a new institution which will work tirelessly to change that must surely be invaluable. And on top of that, it frees up the bailiff to use his legal expertise in court where it is best applied without having to spend so much on English commissioners to preside in his absence. So this proposition offers us the best of all worlds. We get a parliament and a court system which meets all the democratic standards to uphold and defend the rights of Jersey people, which we can boast around the world as a beacon of how democracy can work and preserve what is best about Jersey's culture and heritage. And I hope members seize that opportunity, and I make the proposition, sir.
Is the proposition seconded?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. We have two amendments to the proposition, which will be taken in the order in which they were lodged. So the first is from the Constable of Grouville. I ask the greffier to read the amendment.
Sorry, sir, before we do, could I did indicate earlier, and I think it was just a miscommunication between us. Before we start this debate, I really do want to put on public record and just confirm, get affirmation that this is a constitutional issue and that it would require 25 votes to actually pass through this assembly. And I don't know if the Solicitor General could just confirm that, please.
Well, I think it's a standing order matter, and it does affect the membership of the Assembly. So last time it required 25 votes, and this time it requires 25 votes too. Could you read the amendments?
Page 2, paragraph 1. Before the words "to agree that," insert the words "subject to paragraph 3. Page 3, paragraph 2. For the full stop at the end of paragraph 2, substitute a semicolon. Page 3, a new paragraph 3. After paragraph 2, insert the following new paragraph 3. 3. Paragraphs 1 and 2 shall be void and of no effect unless the majority of the people voting in a referendum on the question of whether the bailiff should remain the President of the States, held in accordance with the referendum Jersey Law 2017, have voted against the bailiff remaining the President of the States.
Constable Grouville.
Thank you, sir. I do not intend to talk for very long on this very simple amendment. I hope members have read my report. For those of us who were in the Assembly, in the last Assembly, we had exactly the same debate on the removal of the bailiff in September 2017, as Senator Mezek has said. And the same amendment as mine was put forward by former Senator Sir Philip Bulhush. I confess, sir, that I drew upon the former Senator's report to that amendment when writing my own report. I should, before I start, just say a little about the timing and PPC's comments, which we had the other day. From their last paragraph, they acknowledge that if we debate and approve the necessary legislation before the referendum, then there is no reason why the removal of the bailiff, if that is the desire of the electorate, can't take place before the next bailiff takes office. And in the report, which you may have been able to read, that came from the Referendum Commission yesterday, they actually think it's beneficial to have the legislation available before the actual referendum. I also asked, I've had some feedback through the GREF from the Referendum Commission, and the preparatory work for this referendum was done in 2017, and that work will still be valid, and they know the question that would be put should this proposition be successful. Incidentally, having read that report very quickly, I think this proposition or this amendment ticks all the boxes at the end of their checklist. Nowhere in the report did it say that this wouldn't be a proper question to put before the electorate. The removal of the bailiff as Speaker of the House is not a simple political issue. It's a major change to our Constitution, and that is why it is essential that such a move has the support of the people. States members, in my view, are already thought of in poor light. If we make a dramatic change to our Constitution without the electorate's support, we will be thought of with even less esteem. The bailiff's role as President of the States is inextricably linked to his or her role as civic head of the island. To suggest that a ceremonial visit on Liberation Day each year, and from time to time when we elect a new Speaker, new Speaker is to be elected, would somehow maintain this link cannot be taken seriously. In the current situation, the bailiff is in regular contact with all States members, including, of course, the ministers and chief minister. He is well known to all of us. If the bailiff is moved as the presiding officer, relationships with States members will soon fall away. He will be the chief judge and have no other role, and certainly would not continue as civic head of the island for the long term. The arguments for and against the retention of the bailiff are easy to understand, and there is no reason why the electorate cannot make an informed decision at the ballot box. One has to ask why any States member would be against this proposition. Is it that they think that there is overwhelming support for the proposal, or are they afraid that the opposite is true? I think we all know the answer, and the latter is true. In other words, there are some who want to introduce something totally against the wishes of the electorate. How undemocratic is that? I do not recall any of my parishioners approaching me to call for the removal of the bailiff from the Assembly, but I have had many parishioners and other islanders over my time as constable who have told me that they want the bailiff to remain as President of the States and civic head of the island. I would be failing my voters if I did not bring this amendment forward. I suggest that should members vote against this amendment and vote for the proposition, they will be failing their voters too. We all received a letter from the former greffier of the States, and I'll leave his opinions about whether or not the bailiff should remain as President of the States to one side and deal with his opinion that this item should not go to a referendum. I simply disagree with his view. He contends that the bailiff can remain as civic head of the island. He contends that the bailiff can remain as civic head of the island. Nowhere in the world is the chief judge civic head of the jurisdiction. The former bailiff, Sir Michael Burt, explains that in his submission that he made to PPC in 2011. It's included in my report. So I contend that this is a major change to our Constitution, in which case the former greffier would conclude, if I'm right, that this should go to a referendum. There was often talk in the room about unfairness, and St Mary's is overrepresented and St Helier is underrepresented. Well, of course, in a referendum, everybody's vote is equal within the island. St Helier and St Saviour's, I think Deputy Tadger said that those two constables represented half the electorate. Well, they can swamp St Mary's vote in a referendum. So if there really is a will for change, then let's give the people the opportunity to say so. If this amendment is accepted, I will be voting for the substantive proposition, as is or as amended by Deputy Pershard. Not because I want the change, but because I believe a referendum will show that the majority of Irelanders do not want this change, and we can put the subject to bed for at least a little while. I urge members to support this amendment.
Is the proposition seconded?
Yes, sir.
Deputy Tadier.
Thanks, sir. So we start off, I've just got a correct point of, I think it's a point of fact, but it's certainly an opinion that's been expressed from the constable that I don't agree with, which the former greffier of the States doesn't agree with. And if you don't want to believe me, because I'm not an independent member, I'm a politician like the rest of us in here, and none of us is impartial. We're all political, surprise, surprise. Well, some of us are, some say that they're not political. Go figure. But if you don't want to accept what I say, at least listen to the former greffier of the States, who has chaired the Assembly. He's been the presiding officer, a clerk who I think is held in esteem by all who have had the pleasure of knowing him and know that he's a man of integrity. And so he's got experience whereof he speaks. And he says that this is not a constitutional matter. And the reason he's right is because we're not debating getting rid of the bailiff. And this term, getting rid of the bailiff, which is commonly used, and we hear it even in the media, but certainly on the doorsteps and when we talk to the public, nobody's getting rid of the bailiff. As far as I know, if we pass a decision in this Assembly to empower ourselves to choose our own speaker, whether from the elected number or from an outside source, we are simply doing that. We are choosing who our speaker is. We're not changing the Constitution in terms of the civic headship of the island, and we're not changing the judiciary role that the bailiff will and the deputy bailiffs will continue to hold. So it's not true to say that the presence of the bailiff and the deputy bailiff in this Assembly are inextricably linked to his civic headship. Rather, his role in this Assembly is derived from the fact that in the past, as we all know, the court was supreme in Jersey. So he was the bailiff, he was the de facto head of the island back in the day. He remains so now. And then, of course, when the Assembly divided from the Royal Court following the very famous events of 1769, and a proper separation of powers was demanded by the people in a popular uprising. It was resisted locally, of course, by the local establishment because they said, actually, we like the system as it is. But luckily, they managed to get more than a two-thirds majority in the Royal Square for their demonstration. And they filled the Royal Square and they went into the Royal Court and demanded change. And that's where we get this States Assembly from. And unfortunately, they didn't do the job properly because the bailiff then continued to preside in this part of the Assembly as well as being the judge. So it's really correcting an error which should have been done at the time. When you separate your court from your legislature, for goodness sake, don't put the same person in charge. It's just an error that they forgot to do, and now we've got it today and we're pretending that this is some kind of constitutional matter that deserves a referendum. The Queen, I've noticed, doesn't preside in the House of Commons, sir. This is a procedural matter. It's not to do with conduct. This is a statement of fact that no monarch has the right to enter the House of Commons even. The monarch will open the houses of the new Parliament, and the monarch will appear in the House of Lords to give the government's opening speech to outline their manifesto, if you like, for the new government, and the monarch will do that from the House of Lords. I found it strange when I went to the UK that the monarch doesn't preside in the House of Commons. I thought that would clearly, your head of state, your civic head, is the one that you would expect to be ruling over the House of Commons, but that's not the case, and they still seem to. And then France I went to, and I watched their Parliament from the TV. Actually, I'd never been to the actual Assembly yet, but I've been to France, and I was surprised to find out that the President isn't the Speaker of the Président de la République I'm talking about isn't the presiding officer in their assembly either. And in fact, most places I've been to, apart from Guernsey or that I've researched, don't have this anomaly. So let's not say that it's an issue which is to do with the civic headship of the bailiff, because it's not. The bailiff will still be around to carry the mace. In fact, he doesn't carry it himself, but he has someone to carry it for him just as well, and the ushers do a very good job. But it's his mace, effectively. He'll be parading with it at the head of the cortege on Liberation Day and at such events, and he'll be followed by the dignitaries from the Royal Court. And some distance behind, you'll find States members following in the footsteps. That's not going to change. That's not going to change if we elect our own Speaker. And the reason that's not going to change is because he is going to remain the civic head of the island, and the people recognise that. The Lord Chancellor in the UK, I think I'm correct in saying, used to be...
Sorry, sir, can I ask the Speaker to just want some clarification, or it's just that he's...
Normally wait till the end of his speech.
Oh, now I can do that?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Sorry, sir.
I don't mind giving way.
It's just that you're asserting the fact that the bailiff could continue in his civic capacity. Well, I think the incumbent bailiff is at odds with that particular view, and I'm just wondering if one needs to ascertain as to exactly where we are with that view, sir.
Well, that's more of a point of argument that you might make in your own speech. Deputy Tadier?
Thanks, sir. I don't mind giving way, and sometimes it's nice to be able to do that to answer the points. Sometimes that's the restrictions of the nature of our debates. We can't have the immediacy of debate in the truest sense of the word. And I accept that point, and Deputy Truscott, of course, will be able to speak. All I would say, with the greatest respect, is that's an opinion. That's the opinion of the bailiff, who's got a publicly stated record on what he thinks should happen with the role of the bailiff, and he's entitled to that. But I think I think that's one of the key issues, is that whoever the bailiff is, and it might be sorry, I try not to laugh, but it might be a female in the future, we don't know. And so they see themselves as guardians of the Constitution, and part of the Constitution that they're trying to protect is the fact that the bailiff should sit in this assembly, and that's one of the three roles. So they tend to be small c conservatives who want to protect Jersey's constitution. So that opinion is not entirely surprising, but it is just an opinion, and it's not one which is shared by other independent people, I would suggest, like the former greffier, who's taken it upon himself to write to us. As I was about to say, the Lord Chancellor's role in the UK was changed, whereby he was the Speaker of the House of Lords, and that wasn't seen to be the correct process. That was very much a change to the Constitution, in the sense it was a change to the membership of their composition and who presided in the Assembly. Of course, they put that to a referendum. As we know, it was a very close referendum, and the people decided that the Lord Chancellor should not sit in the House of Lords anymore. That part, of course, didn't happen, because that's me just using the rhetorical device of irony, because there was never a referendum on the decision to remove the Chancellor's powers to preside, because it was an internal matter. And when I've had emails on this issue, I've tried to remain respectful, but I have replied in some cases saying, with due respect, this is not a matter for you, this is a matter for States members, because we're deciding who should chair our Assembly, who should preside at any one time. In a similar way, if we decided that we didn't want the greffier to preside in the Assembly anymore, he is doing that now, we might decide amongst ourselves that we no longer want him to preside. That's not a matter for the public. That's a very simple matter that we can decide ourselves, and it doesn't go to a referendum. But there's another key point for putting it to a referendum, that is that it obviously depends on the question. We know that we'll be putting a question to the public probably at the lowest point of esteem that this Assembly has ever been held in, if we were to judge by the election turnout as a result. And therefore any question, especially the driest question of Rai Vita proportions that we could put to the public, on a matter which should really be dealt internally would likely attract a low turnout, which wouldn't be representative of public opinion on this very niche matter. So I see it again, whether it's the intention, as just another hurdle which is unnecessary to getting on with this fundamental change. And if it is the case that it's hoped that the public who turn out will be the motivated Conservative majority to do so, and I make no criticism of those individuals, of course, because you could argue that everybody has the right to turn out and you shouldn't criticise those who do turn out. But we know the political reality in Jersey is that the people who understand the system and understand the nuances of the role that is performed out by the bailiff and what goes on in this assembly, they're the ones who are most likely to vote, they're the ones who are most likely to be, if you like, well connected and more likely to secure the result that is wanted. That's not an inevitability by any means, because it will be accompanied by an education programme which will have to be delivered by the PPC, and they will have to just go out and state facts. And the problem is when you state facts about things like electoral reform, or in this case the role of the bailiff, you will be seen as being biased, because stating facts about such a ludicrous and archaic and undemocratic position in a factual, impartial way in the Jersey context will necessarily sound biased. So if you go into schools, for example, on a slightly different issue and say the Constable of St Helier represents 35,000 people and the Constable of St Mary's represents say 1,800 people in his parish, do you think that's fair? You will immediately, given the fact they've got the same voting rights, you will be told that you're not being partial, because it's going to solicit a particular answer, and the answer will be, no, of course, I don't think it's fair. But that's just stating a fact. And if you go into schools and say, we currently have a system whereby states members are not able to elect their speaker, yet every other country in the world, bar Guernsey, can elect its own speaker, and all Commonwealth members, apart from Guernsey, have the autonomy to select their own speakers, and there are well rehearsed arguments for this. Do you think that's the right thing to do? Those facts will be seen as being biased, but it's necessary to put those facts to the public in order to get them to make the decision. So I don't see how this is going to work, but perhaps the most practical argument is simply the fact that we don't have time for this. The public have put us here to make decisions on their behalf. This is an internal matter for us to decide amongst ourselves whether we want a speaker of our own or whether we want to continue with the status quo. Let's not waste the time of the public and the time and the energy that takes to put together, especially outside of an election period, to ask them a futile question which we should be answering ourselves. Let's not abdicate that responsibility that we've been put here to make ourselves.
Before we go on, Deputy Truscott was quite right to ask about whether an absolute majority of members is required for the main proposition, which it is, but just to clarify the amendments, that rule, Standing Order 89A, doesn't apply. It's an ordinary vote with an ordinary outcome. Deputy Labby.
Thank you, sir. Let's remember that this is an amendment, that we are debating whether it's right or not, wise or not, to go to a referendum on this question. That is the question that the Deputy of Grouville is putting to us. So let's not... I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. No Freudian slip intended. So let's just remind ourselves of that, because we don't want 3 substantive debates in a row, do we? I'd like to thank the Referendum Commission for putting together their very comprehensive report on how referenda should be carried out in the island. And it's, I've had the good fortune to meet with the chairman of the Referendum Commission a couple of times, and I'm hoping to arrange a meeting with the Commission and the Assembly, because it's absolutely fascinating. There's a science to referenda, and it's one that we have in Jersey ignored up until now, up until setting up the Referendum Commission, which I think was a really important step forward. I think that the Constable of Greville makes assumptions on the Referendum Commission's report. The Referendum Commission would not come out and say, after the states have made a decision to ask the public a question in a referendum, the Commission are not going to come out and say, you shouldn't do that, because they would be accused of being political, and so you can't look to the referendum for that kind of decision. I do think, as I say, Constable of Greville does make assumptions in terms of he thinks it ticks, this referendum question would tick all the boxes. I don't think it does tick all the boxes because it's a very complex question. And the Referendum Commission did a lot of preparatory work, as the Constable says, because we've been here before, haven't we? The Assembly made a decision on going to a referendum on the question of the bailiff recently, and then made the decision, this Assembly made the decision not to go forward with that referendum. In the preparatory work that the Commission did, it did quite a lot of very good market research in terms of quantitative or qualitative research with focus groups, with representative samples. And I have to say that the results which we've asked the Referendum Commission to make available to members, the results of that research with those focus groups, with members of the public, whilst the Referendum Commission were trying to decide on the best question, the headlines from that research was this, that people didn't know what exactly the bailiff did. They didn't understand the dual role and what was meant by that. They didn't have a grasp or understanding of what the separations of powers issue means. They thought, number 4, that this is the sort of decision they pay politicians to make. And 5, they didn't really care. Now, those were the 5 headlines, I hope I'm right in saying, I think I've remembered that correctly. Those were the 5 headlines from the research that was carried out. The Constable of St John, as I say, is making an awful lot of assumptions Greville, I'm sorry. Of Greville is making an awful lot of assumptions in his proposition. We all do it. I will make this assumption that the public of Jersey, whichever way you sit on this debate, about the role of the bailiff, we're talking about whether we should go to a referendum, and the public of Jersey will not thank us for going to a referendum at this time with this question. They do believe it's the sort of thing that we're paid here to make decisions on. And here's another piece of evidence, if the Connotables won't accept that. We have now e-petitions, and people can propose an e-petition. It sits on the website for 6 months, gathering signatures, and if it gets 5,000, we debate it in this Assembly. There was an e-petition for the states to bring a gay bar to Jersey. And in the 6 months that that petition was live, it got 90 signatures. There was another petition that the states should refer to the public in referendum before making any decisions on the role of the bailiff. That got 89 signatures. 89 signatures in 6 months. And former Senator Pershard, who proposed it, was all over Twitter and Facebook. So this is my petition, sign it, sign it, sign it. And according to the public, a bigger priority for this Assembly is to bring a gay bar to Jersey, not to go to them on a question about the bailiff. So those are the 2 bits of evidence that I do have. As I say, it is a question it's not about whether we agree or not with the separation of powers and the dual role. It's about whether it's sensible to do this, to spend the money. And by the way, the Constable of Greville cites the last referendum, and probably quite sensible, in that it would cost £70,000 to £80,000 to do another one. But now we have a referendum commission, we've got to do referenda properly. And we cannot continue, I'm going to have to change the law for this, we cannot continue having referendums which don't have the lead campaigns, the verified, authorised lead campaigns for each side, yes or no, we can't continue not to publicly fund those campaigns. Otherwise, we're in the situation where we were with the Constables referendum in 2014, where we had a bunch of constables with the time and money to mount their campaign because they weren't facing an election and it was at the same time as the general election, and we had a citizen journalist on the no side in an 18th century costume waving a flag as a one-man band. That was the no campaign, and the constables and their campaign was the yes campaign. Completely breaks all the rules, all the international standards for how a referendum should take place. And that is why I continue to say that the referendum on the constables doesn't hold water. It's not valid. I'm sorry to say that, but the referendum itself did not meet international standards, and we have got to do that. So the cost of it, Constable LeMaitre, will be more than 80,000 if we're going to achieve not even maximum penetration, as is most desirable, but even a minimum adequate penetration. You're going to need the same amount of money for each campaign, at least, as a senator would be allowed to spend on an all-island-wide mandate campaign. So you're talking about £10,000 or £15,000 for each side. So you're putting 30,000 at least onto that debate. It is a very, very complex question, as we're going to find out later on. The idea of the guardian of the Constitution, the civic head, the whole separation of powers issue, that is not an argument, a not sensible thing to put to the public. The constable wants to use a referendum to back up his argument, and he's honest about that, and that's good of him to be honest about that. But that isn't a reason for going to the public with a referendum. It is not on the checklist. It absolutely isn't. The constable says, in quotes, that removing the bailiff from chairing these assemblies, presiding of these assembly day in, day out, is going to be a dramatic change. To who? I'd love to know how many people are watching this or listening to this on the radio or television at the moment, but it isn't. I don't think it's over 1,000 or over 500. So, in actual fact, hardly anyone is going to notice if we make this change. But I'm not straying onto the territory. I do think the island would not thank us at this time for spending £120,000, £130,000 asking them this question. It's the wrong question to put to them at the wrong time. And whatever you will feel about the bailiff, please, I ask the Assembly, as they did 6 months ago, or whenever we last debated this, let's not have a referendum on this issue. Let's be able to make the decision ourselves, as we are paid to do, as we are elected to do.
Dr. Guida.
Here we go again. It feels like only 6 months ago. I find it extraordinary, and I hope you're keeping count. I hope the Assembly is keeping count. That it is the same people who tend to complain the most about the lack of democracy in the island, who stand up and scream every time somebody suggests a referendum. I would welcome referenda. I think we should have 3 or 4 every year. We complain that people think that they are forgotten and that we do our little business without consulting them. Why don't we consult them? And yes, it is expensive. And yes, it means doing it properly and having campaigns. But I think we should do it reasonably often. Every time we're too close to decide, or we have a problem like this which keeps coming back every 6 months, why don't we go out and ask? How can we say no? If they have decided, even if it's by 50.5%, like for Brexit, they've decided that is it. We cannot say anything else. I'm also a little bit worried. This is extraordinary. It's fantastic that this is all written down, that we have the Hansard to look at later on. We don't want this to go to a referendum because people don't understand. That they're really not good enough to understand this very complex issue. And the few who do understand, well, they would vote wrong. So you cannot have the ones who understand, and those few who are very, very afraid of this affair, we cannot have them to vote because they would vote wrong. And this has been said, 5 or 6 times in July. Once we're here, but I'm sure, twice, and I'm sure that before this debate is over, it will have been said 6 other times by the same people who try to explain how bad democracy is in this island. The referendum is always a good idea. If we have any doubts, ask the public.
Councillor Trinity.
Thank you, sir. I only intended to speak once in this debate, so it's going to be now. I expect, like many other members today, I'm having a serious case of déjà vu. Oh, why are we here again, 17 months on, again gazing at our navels and fiddling while Rome burns? Is it little wonder that there is voter apathy out there and the public are disillusioned with politicians when we carry on like this? There are so many other important issues that affect the daily lives of our citizens, yet we choose to debate reform and political niceties all the time. Not one of the parishioners that I've had any contact with in advance of this debate has voiced any opinion other than the bailiff should remain as president of our assembly. I would go further to say most of them thought it was ridiculous that Senator Mezzi and other political enthusiasts for change have the right to simply dismiss centuries of history and tradition. I, along with the vast majority of people that I represent, consider ourselves lucky to be here in the bailiwick of Jersey, and it is that word that does it for us. Bailiwick and bailiff are inextricably linked. The bailiff is a Crown appointment and is the guardian of our constitutional links with the United Kingdom. I don't understand how any member elected to this assembly can think that they have the right to put at risk our quasi-independent constitutional status and all the benefits that that brings with it. Our bailiff and deputy bailiff are our senior judges, and they're trained to be impartial, and if we cannot trust them, what hope is there for any of us? The bailiff has offered a simple and pragmatic solution to overcome the potential for conflict. Some perceive this arising out of the dual role. Where is the evidence that anyone has suffered or been disenfranchised simply because the bailiff has a dual role? I put it to you that is a concept born out of misunderstanding or misguided perception. It will come as no surprise that I will not be supporting the Senator's proposition, and as I have said previously, I would not support it if I was hanging by my thumbs in the Royal Square. I'm inclined, however, to support the Constable of Grouville's amendment for a referendum, as I did when this came back last time, being the very minimum requirement for such a far-reaching constitutional change. This Assembly owe it to the people of Jersey to be fiercely protective of our quirky, unique ways and traditions, because that's what makes it special to live here in this wonderful island. And if they don't like it, tell them to send a gunboat. Our system has served us well for centuries, and I see no reason why we should simply kowtow down to external pressure for change. We must do nothing that will diminish or dilute the position of the bailiff as civic head of our island, and he must remain as president of this assembly. This is Jersey, not some county council in the UK. I appeal to members to not let us be railroaded into giving up our independence and our heritage. Enough is enough. I urge members to support this amendment and to reject the main proposition. Thank you, sir.
Constable of St Martin.
Thank you, sir. Actually, I wanted to clarify a point in Deputy Labby's speech, but he's not in the Assembly at the moment.
It will be difficult.
But it is quite important. Well, so I can put it on record then.
Now, or do you wish to
well, I'll put it on record because I just wanted to clarify a point. Could Deputy Labby, when he returns, he stated to me this morning that he would like to have a referendum on PPC's proposition for super constituencies. But then he was on fire this afternoon, telling us all that we can't have a referendum for a bailiff. I'd just like to say that it seems to me the referendum on super constituencies would be just as complex as a referendum on the bailiff. So could he clarify why we could have one and we couldn't have the other? And I'd also like to echo what a previous speaker said and say that by not having a referendum, is he saying that the public are too ignorant to understand the nuances of the role of the bailiff? Thank you.
Deputy Morrell.
Thank you, sir. The danger posed to other islanders by me not having had my lunch or my breakfast is now widely known. And the Constable of St Clement may remember once that he was harangued and heckled as he walked down Pier Road. Shortly, in fact, the morning after, the States of Jersey did what I think was an injustice to the people of Jersey back in July 2013. And I say this in response to Deputy Guida's question, how can you say no to a referendum? I'll tell you, and the Constable of St Clement found out that morning why we should say no to a referendum. Here's BBC from 16th of July 2013. Politicians have rejected plans to reform Jersey's parliament, voted for in an island-wide referendum. Islanders supported a move to abolish the office of senator, reduce the number of politicians and introduce large voting districts. Members voted 28 against, 21 in favour. Constable Len Norman abstained from the vote. Poor Constable Norman, I didn't even realise he had abstained when I was heckling him that morning. It's the only time I've ever acted like that. I've ever been so incensed, so angry with the people in this assembly that I felt I had to just go and tell them. And I stood on the doorstep after having spoken to Constable St Clement, who didn't respond once. He just looked at me like I was mad. Because I didn't care whether it's option A, B or C that had come up in that referendum. I cared about the fact that the 49 people in here had seen, that felt that they knew better than islanders. And so from then, I thought, why should we have a referendum? Any referendum we have is just going to come back here and, to be honest, be thrown out by the people in this place. And so we should not have a referendum on this. We should have referendums on very, very few matters. Our job is to be here as part of a representative democracy. We are here to represent the views, to cogitate and to think about it and to listen and to bring that all into our heads and vote as we see best, as we have analysed and feel is right for this island. That's our job. That's why we're here. And so I find it astounding that the people who, many of whom are here, who went against the referendum in 2013, and you are here, many of you, you're now arguing for a referendum. It's ridiculous. In the same way that we have Constable St Martin questioning whether Deputy Labby is for or against referendums, depending on the subject in question. So no, just no, for any subject pretty much, except should we abolish democracy in the island? Maybe that would be worthy of a referendum. But other than that, no, we should not be having referendums. It's our job. We're going to have these arguments every time. You know what? It's childish politics. That's what it is. Oh, I don't like this. I'm scared about this. I'm going to ask for a referendum because I know it will go this particular way. It's childish. It's not necessary. Islanders don't want it. Islanders do not want to be burdened with this. And what they certainly don't want, and as I discovered, I was so angry that day and I hadn't had my breakfast. But I was furious because I have never seen a time when people just turn around and laugh in the face of their constituents. Why did we spend the £80,000 or the £70,000 on that referendum? Why did we ask people to give up time in their day to think about it, to read through the leaflets, to talk to their friends, to think about this and actually think that their decision would be the decision that was made if plenty of us, and like I say, many of them still here in this assembly, were then just going to turn around and throw it out. So for that reason, because of the actions of all those who were here in 2013, because you all voted against the referendum we had then, there's no way I'm going to vote for a referendum now. Because you cannot pick and choose when you have a referendum, when you respect a referendum, when you don't respect a referendum. No, we're here, we're paid to represent our constituents. We can make this decision by ourselves. And please, for that reason, just don't go down this route of a referendum. It's a diversion. It's been done for all the wrong reasons. And it's not about democracy. It's just about getting the result you want. That's what it is aimed at. That's why the referendum was ignored last time, because people wanted a result, they didn't get a result, they changed it, they did whatever. So no, unfortunately, Deputy Guida, the reason we say no to this is because when we have referendums, the States Assembly doesn't respect them. Thank you, sir.
Councillor St Mary.
Thank you, sir. Sir, first, may I say that I take this as a very serious issue. When the main proposition came through my door, it conjured up great interest with my dog. Of all the propositions received, it's the only one that he decided to get his teeth into. He obviously found it most distasteful, as he was unable to stomach more than a mouthful, like it would appear the majority of our population. I am proud of our Jersey institution. It is unique. It does not comply with the political correctness of many other jurisdictions. Why should it? When it's what our people are content with and has never caused a problem. The Jersey people want the bailiff to remain as President of the States. If that was to change, it should be a people's choice, not taken on the vote of politicians. As this is a change to our Constitution, should we be making such a decision in this Assembly? This is a people's choice. It also ties in with future reform proposals which change the makeup of the state's members and constituency boundaries in relation to equal votes. All of these issues should have the electorate's views in order to have a democratic reason to change. This is an emotive and very important issue that should involve the people. Both issues should be decided by the island electorate in a referendum. A referendum that is binding by the preferred public choice, not returned to this chamber to be cherry-picked and then not acted upon. We have in the past witnessed the public disdain for not accepting their vote on previous reform proposals, and this has been compounded by the UK Brexit referendum, where politicians have overridden the public preference. On Friday evening at the end of our community choir practice, I put the question of a speaker replacing the bailiff. It was not a long debate. Only one person in 25 thought that we should comply. Most were horrified that we are losing our heritage or uniqueness for the sake of complying with other jurisdictions who do not operate in an exemplary manner. If that opinion is echoed across the island, then it could be that only 4% of our population agree with this proposal. That alone should not be enough to change our constitution. We have a unique government. We should not be making changes simply to appease others who are dictated to by Brussels. 80 years ago, a little bloke in Germany tried to achieve domination by using guns and bombs. Have people sacrificed their lives to have our constitution altered by stealth and conformity to others, which is something that continues to spread from mainland Europe? I read with great interest that I could apply to be a speaker. I must point out that I have no desire to do that, as I lack the vast knowledge required to be a candidate. If I did possess that ability and achieved the speaker position, would I need to change my name, as surely the speaker could not have the name Labai or bailiff, as that could be controversial in itself and confusing with others who wish to exclude our bailiff. Furthermore, if an elected speaker was taken from within, one of our people's representatives, then that would leave a constituency imbalance. We were not elected to interfere with issues such as these. We have a system that works, with a bailiff presiding over the states. When the bailiff is unable to attend the deputy bailiff takes that position. When that is not possible, the role falls to the greffier or the deputy. So there is not a problem, apart from not complying to the wishes of others. The bailiff's role is respected by the people of Jersey, and it should only change if that is the wish of the people. Changing the role of our bailiff to a speaker will not improve the way in which this chamber operates, or improve our electorate's lives, or encourage them to vote. That is something we should be doing now by actually listening to what the people want. The issues that they really care about, like our hospital, immigration, the housing crisis, etc. Changing the role of the bailiff will not solve these problems. If, as at present, the bailiff is occupied in the Royal Court, then the deputy bailiff presides. There is nothing wrong with that system. This is a system that has served the island well and has proven to do so. Jersey was adopted by England in 1204, that choice being made by the island population. Since then, we have remained loyal to the reigning king or queen. This is a matter of values and respect for our constitution. How much do I value and respect our constitution, our queen, and our bailiff? This is our culture, our heritage. If necessary, I would be prepared to defend that with my life. I would gladly stop a bullet to defend my wife, our queen, and our bailiff. Would I be prepared to do that for the present Speaker in the House of Commons? Or a senator, or anyone proposing this alteration to our system? Not on your life. And I mean no offence to the senator. I therefore will support the proposition of the Constable of Greville, which recommends a public referendum. Thank you, sir.
So can I ask a point of clarification from the previous speaker?
Yes.
Shortly after the revelation that those of us who want a separation of powers are secretly working for Brussels, he mentioned something about the Germans and bombs and fighting. Could you just clarify what he meant by that and who in that analogy in this debate represents the Germans?
Sir, that was not a dig at present-day Germany in any way. It was a reference to the system that was in place 80 years ago and caused a lot of sacrifice amongst many lives across Europe and the rest of the world.
So, and the second part of my clarification is who in this debate is comparable to that?
Sir, I didn't suggest that anybody was comparable to that at all.
Thank you. Is anybody else? Deputy Higgins.
It's seeking clarification again, sir.
Okay.
I happen to love history. I spend, when I get free time, I go to the National Archives and research various things. I'm not aware that in 1204 the population of the island were asked if they wanted to remain with Britain. And I'd like the Constable to tell us what referendum took place at that time. And equally, I would like to know what referendum was taken in 1948 when the jurors and the rectors were removed from the Assembly. They weren't.
Point of order, sir. That's not clarification.
Well, you preempt me, Constable. I think those were rhetorical questions. I think we all. I think we know the answers to those. That's why they're rhetorical. And
so, with respect,
I'm just dealing with Deputy Higgins. I think that's not a clarification. That's a debate and point. It's a rhetorical question. You're making a point, which is fair enough in the course of debate, but not in terms of trying to ask for clarifications.
I was trying to be helpful. It's a point of order, and the deputy, I don't think, spoken, has he, unless I missed his speech, so he can carry on as much as he wants in that line to expound that point.
It's a perfectly valid debate and point. Did you wish to speak now, or I have Deputy Gardner on the list otherwise?
I'll speak shortly.
Deputy Gardner.
I follow Deputy Lalby's suggestion, and I would probably will do one speech, kind of summing up very swiftly where I am standing. I do believe changes happening and need to happen. At the same time, change should happen from right reasons. I would like to share with you my personal journey for the last month when I went through different meetings trying to bring together my views on bailiff role. I remember when I arrived to the island 10 years ago, I found the role of the bailiff is one of the things that make Jersey unique. It's really unique compared to most of the places that I lived and worked. In April, I held 2 surgeries in St. Helier, one at La Pucala and one at Town Hall. And I have 20 participants, not thousands, 20. It's my first surgery, I've just been elected. And 18 expressed very firm view to keep role of bailiff as it is, and 2 said they don't have enough understanding. Saying this, I lived and worked in 3 different countries where it's strict separation of the powers. So I did face a cognitive dissonance between what I believe that it should be separation of the power to a very special position of the bailiff in Jersey. I have had meetings and conversations with lots of different people from different backgrounds, including lawyers who studied English and Jersey constitutional law, because it was really important for me to understand where is the problem. Is there a problem of separation of the powers specifically in Jersey? And if it's not, what's the core problem? Why we do need to do this change? Because lots of parishioners said to me, this change is not required. Electoral reform does require, but bailiff, what's happening with you? I think actually the separation of the power, what at least I've got from the lawyers, is the principle doesn't mean to have them operate in vacuum. It should be in balance. I think there is a big confusion between separation of the powers and balance of the powers. You need an extent to which one arm of the government is answerable to other, but you also must have procedures to eliminate potential for circumstances creating a bias which can happen with any person chosen to be a chair. For one of the reasons why British Constitution has been admired historically is the constitutional balance. And I feel that a lot of people refer to cloture panel, made a fundamental misunderstanding from my perspective of implication of the separation of powers principle to the matter of the bailiff. The bailiff does not vote as a member of the State Assembly. He, therefore, is not member of the legislature. Nor does enforce public laws made by the State Assembly while chairing the State Assembly, but he applies the rules made by the State Assembly to govern its own conduct. There is a second argument that I do understand about the power of states not being able to dismiss a bailiff as a speaker. And we might need to introduce new law. I feel there's a public interest in where our assembly is standing now. From my perspective, I would like to have an evolution of the process. I would like to see a change. But what is proposed today is a revolution, and I don't feel that we need to stop everything, completely change everything. We need some way to develop to be there. I'm not a big fan of referendum. Lots of money. We didn't follow the previous one. We do have a low level of civil engagement. Public doesn't believe in a referendum, unfortunately. Saying this, I would like to find a way to go forward. And there were lots of discussion between the members and through the emails There are different options. Even now at the tea room, I had another option that I haven't heard before from Deputy Higgins. And I would love to see this option discussed. The options that are today on the table are not leaving me a choice to support the referendum, because I do think at the proposition as it stands now, we do need to give to public to decide. It might will change in a couple months, 3 months, 4 months, not sure. Let's see how the process involving in going forward. And another thing, a referendum becomes a bad word in Jersey. But referendum as a tool, as a democratic tool, is a really strong one, is a really good one. So maybe this is the time that this assembly will say, actually, let's make a referendum and let's honor it and let's respect it and let's bring the trust back. Thank you.
Deputy Ash.
Thank you, sir. I will be supporting the retention of the bailiff as Speaker, but that's a debate for another day. Possibly Saturday at about 5:30 at this rate. But I won't be supporting a referendum on this subject. The main reason was if we were looking to get rid of the bailiff, as some people say, to actually remove the bailiff from office, then I'd fully support a referendum on that subject. But that's not what this debate is about. This debate is about who is going to preside as Speaker of this Assembly, of this group of people, sir. And it's up to this Assembly to choose who they have as that Speaker.
Deputy Ward.
Thank you, sir. Just very briefly, a referendum means that yet again this Assembly passes the buck in decision making. It could not be a worse time for us to do that, given the image we have outside this Assembly. I was elected on a manifesto that clearly gave my views on the separation of roles within the Assembly. People knew what they were voting for. I spoke about it on the doorstep. It was clear. We need to be able to decide as an Assembly over who presides over this Assembly. That is what we're talking about. This does not need to go to the wider public. It is a complete and utter waste of money. Debate after debate in this chamber, Assembly chamber, I think I got it right, I'm catching disease here, in this Assembly says, what about the money we're spending? We don't have the money for really key issues that we want to talk about. Over the last few days, we've talked about that. Why are we wasting money on another referendum? And as was said, we are ignoring the research on the Referendum Commission that we've already spent money on, and we're going to ignore that as well. And we wonder why, when we go to the public, they have no faith in us because they say we're wasting money on pointless activities in the Assembly while we're not getting things right. Let's not do it again. There are much more important things that we should be debating in this Assembly rather than having a referendum again. Housing, the hospital, mental health, poverty, the cost of living, education, I could go on. This is a, I cannot support this amendment. I think it's simply there as yet another distraction from making a simple decision, and then this Assembly can move on, and let's get on with the work that's actually necessary. I will not support this amendment. Thank you.
Sir, could I just ask a point of clarification, please?
Councillor Greville.
Did you say we were ignoring the electoral... who were we ignoring? The Electoral Commission, thank you.
Electoral Commissioner's report as referenced by Deputy Labby.
The Referendum Commission, I think is the one, yeah. Sure.
The Referendum Commission? Yes. We were ignoring their... recommendations.
Sorry, any other member wish to speak in the debates? Deputy Higgins.
It's going to be very brief. I'm going to speak on the main proposition, but I do believe that, just like the earlier proposition from Senator Farnham, this use of the recognition of a referendum is a wrecking motion trying to sort of stop it happening. The other thing, too, I'd say is that referendums, we think, solve problems. They don't. All we have to do is look at the United Kingdom at the present time on the Brexit referendum. And we've got a situation where those who wanted Brexit won, and all those who were against it and wanted to stay have fought and tried to get a second referendum and unravel the whole lot. And what have we got? We've got a divided nation. And if we do have another referendum in the United Kingdom and the Remainers win, then the 17 million or whatever it was who voted to leave are going to feel so bitter and twisted about it. I don't believe that this is an issue for a referendum. I believe it is, as Deputy Ash said, a matter for this Assembly. What we're talking about is not removing the bailiff and getting rid of him from the island and his role. We're just saying that the bailiff should continue being the civic head, and I have no problem whatsoever with that, and should sit in the court. I do object very much so to the waste of money that we have, that while the bailiff and deputy bailiff are in here, that we have to bring in judges from the United Kingdom to listen to the cases, and there's a great cost. So I do believe that there is a role for the bailiff. It's as the chief judge and as the civic head, not as the speaker in this Assembly. And at the same time, I won't be supporting the idea of a referendum because, one, I do believe it's a waste of money. Two, I also believe it could be very divisive itself, and it will not do anything for the respect of this Assembly. Thank you.
Senator Mazek.
Thank you, sir. Needless to say, I oppose this amendment. I agree with what Deputy Higgins says. I think it is by definition a wrecking amendment, and the Constable of Grouville did essentially admit that in his proposal by saying he wants it to be a vehicle for stopping change. So that by definition makes it a wrecking amendment. And I agree with, I think, pretty much everything that Deputy Morell said, in that this is simply a case of trying to pass the buck rather than making a decision on the merits or, more importantly, on the mandate that you have. Quite a few members, I think, contributed thoughts into this debate that show that there is a real lack of understanding of what electoral-based democracy is, how it works, and what are the principles underpinning it. And there are a few quotes that I think made this clear. The Constable of Grouville asked the question, you know, what are they afraid of? Why are they afraid of holding a referendum? The Constable of Trinity, and this was outstanding what he said here, he said that people were asking, you know, what right I, or for that matter anyone else, would have to bring this proposition. Well, I'll tell you what right I've got to bring it. It's called a mandate from the fact I won an election and my manifesto said I'd do this. So there, somebody who didn't face an election is questioning the right of someone who won a very tough election campaign to try and fulfill their manifesto. Where's the democracy there? It's to suggest that when you get to this chamber, you give up on all of those promises you made to the public who put you in this position. What sort of perverse understanding of democracy is that? To say that because I don't like what you stand for, because I've spoken to a handful of people who've got an alternative point of view and will have expressed that point of view at the ballot box in their own way, you who are elected with a mandate, with a manifesto, don't have the right to pursue that. It's absolutely absurd. The Jersey Evening Post a few days ago did an article and they tried to collate what comments had been made on this subject by candidates at the last election, and it was very interesting. Of the senators, 5 out of 8 of them were down as supporting this change. That's a majority, including actually the 2 poll toppers. And it had the largest group supporting this change. There were some who wouldn't give which way they were. In fact, as it happens, all of those were members who were uncontested at that last election. Deputy Gida said in his speech, and I've got a degree of sympathy from where he's coming from. He's got a position, he says he'd like there to be 3 or 4 referendums a year. Fair enough, I don't agree with that, but that's a perfectly consistent position to have if that's what you'd like the democratic settlement with the public to look like. But then the question's got to be asked, where do you draw the line on what does get put to the public versus what doesn't get put to them? I think if an issue arises in the middle of a term that was completely unforeseen, or circumstances change, or there is a great question that could never be answered by a parliament alone, I would put the issue of independence for the island as being one of those issues in the way that they had it in Scotland. I think that's a fair question to put to a referendum. But why would you put a question to a referendum when your manifesto was clear on it anyway, when you already have the mandate to pursue that change? Why would you not put anything else to a referendum? A particular tax rise. How many of the tax rises that have happened in the island over the last few years were very clearly stipulated in the manifestos of the candidates who proposed them? I remember one former Treasury Minister saying, vote for me and I won't raise GST. And then within a year had done exactly that. I mean, if ever there were a case for a referendum on a random political subject, that would have been it, because of the breaking of the democratic mandate, not the attempt to fulfill that mandate. But here's the most important thing. And I've said this before in this assembly, so I hope I can have members' indulgence by quoting myself. But I've said that referendums give you results, they don't give you answers. Brexit referendum is a great example of this, but this referendum, I think, would establish that particularly so. A referendum result, which probably would be achieved on a minuscule turnout, 10% if we were lucky, which sought to legitimise what by any objective democratic assessment is illegitimate, would not help take us forward. My concern with the lack of separation of powers is, as what I said it was in my opening speech on this, which is that I am concerned that citizens of Jersey don't have recourse to an independent tribunal to uphold their rights. That will not change if there's a referendum that says it's okay that you don't have that fundamental right to recourse to an independent tribunal. I will be as concerned about that democratic shortcoming than I would be otherwise. It makes no odds to me. And if a referendum happens and a minuscule proportion of the electorate come out and take part and say, yes, we're against the separation of powers, I'm sorry, but it doesn't change my mind. I will still want a separation of powers. I will not consider the result of that referendum to be legitimate, not just because of the reasons the chairman of PPC outlined, in that it doesn't fulfil the criteria of the Venice Commission, but of the subject itself. If there were a referendum, and I've used this example before, asking to disenfranchise left-handed people from being able to vote, and all the right-handed people came out and said, yes, we will disenfranchise left-handed people, I wouldn't accept that result either, because it would be on an undemocratic question attempting to legitimise the illegitimate. So you can't just use this as a tool to pass the buck and not make decisions and not try to uphold the objective democratic rights. It is a wrecking amendment. It is a wrecking amendment by admission. And I think that the report and the speech that has been produced alongside it are actually, I'm sorry to say, of quite poor quality and make several points that contradict themselves. In the opening of the report, it talks about the ABC option referendum and then compares it to the 2014 Constable question referendum, where it points out that in 2014, St Helier was the only parish to vote in favour of removing the constables, but this was only by 22 votes. It was very slim, quite surprising, actually, isn't it? Especially when you compare it to the referendum a year before, where the option to remove the constables won in St Helier by a massive landslide. Now, what does that show you? It shows you that you get whatever result you want by asking whatever question you think will get you there better. If the question is, should the bailiff be removed from the States Assembly, then the answer will probably be no. If the question is, do you think Jersey should establish a democratic separation of powers, I'm pretty sure the answer to that would be yes. You get whatever result you want based on what question you ask. And in that referendum, with such a low turnout, if the result were a yes and voted to separate, to end the dual role of the bailiff, those who didn't like that would do exactly what they did in 2013, as Deputy Morell said, would say, sorry, turnout's too low, it doesn't reflect my experience of speaking to my constituents and people in Jersey, such low turnout, I can't justify supporting it. Likewise, people on my side who think the separation of powers is sacrosanct would say, sorry, 10% turnout doesn't cut it for me either. In which case, what have we done? We've wasted over £100,000, as Deputy Labby said. We will have not fulfilled the criteria in the Venice Commission at a time where we're seeking to become more and more Venice compliant. What a laughing stock we would appear because of that. And I think we'll have irritated the public by wasting their time. We'll have insulted their intelligence by putting a question that for most of them is completely meaningless when there are such greater issues to be getting on with. So I say to members, please cut the indignation to say these people are just not interested in democracy, when what we're trying to do is to fill the democratic mandate that those who speak loudest against this themselves don't have. So cut the indignation. We are trying to respect our voters and our constituents by doing what we told them we would do. So don't hold that against us. If you want to argue for it on different grounds, fine, but drop that one because it looks ridiculous, honestly, and it shows a lack of understanding about how democracy works. We'll come to this probably more substantially in the main debate, but the phrases that have been used in this report and the speech from the Constable of Grouville about, what a dramatic change to our constitution it would be, I think really overplay the situation significantly. The fact is that removing one part of the multifaceted role that the bailiff has in island life is not a significant constitutional change. It's actually a constitutional enhancement. Going back to the authority that I referred to in the previous debate from, let me get the case up, from Thoburn versus Sunderland City Council about what constitutes a constitutional piece of law, about the conditions of the legal relationship between citizen and state in some general overarching manner, or that relationship with a parliament being able to govern itself and pass its own laws without outside interference, and having the right to recourse in an independent tribunal. Those rights of citizens are fundamental, and having a referendum to prevent that from happening is an act of democratic sabotage, and I hope members reject this amendment.
If I may, sir.
Deputy Morrell, what was the...
I was going to... I'm aware of the hypocrisy. As someone who speaks a huge amount in this chamber, I'm aware of the hypocrisy. But I believe 10 people have spoken. I was going to ask for a guillotine motion again, so I can't. Oh, you see, I apologise.
Can I ask for it, please?
More than 10 people have spoken, so we can accept that. It's slightly odd because the Assembly's already agreed to adjourn at past, but we can finish this debate. Someone can apply to finish the debate 30 minutes from now, so that would carry on into tomorrow if necessary. Councillor St John.
Thank you, sir. When bringing a proposition to this Assembly, I believe that one of the criteria you should put to yourself is, will this proposition be in the best interests of the people of Jersey? And would it be supported by the people of Jersey, the people we are elected to represent? The answer, of course, should be yes. And therefore, anybody who brings a proposition that is not prepared to have it tested shouldn't bring the proposition. It is as simple as that. So, having heard Senator Mezek speak against having his proposition tested by the public, you came bottom of the senatorial poll. Through the chair, you came bottom through that.
Through the chair means not you. I didn't stand in the senatorial election.
I know you didn't, sir. I would hate to guess. No, I won't go there. I do apologise, sir. Senator Mezek came 8th, and whilst it was on his manifesto, I readily accept that, but it doesn't mean that the majority of the island supported that particular point on his manifesto. It wasn't the only item on it. There were many others. So, no, you've done the right thing in bringing it. But in doing so, if you have any confidence, if the proposer had any confidence in his proposition, he would say, bring on the referendum. I know what I'm doing is right. Bring it on and let's have a referendum. But of course, no, because he knows he wouldn't win. I urge people to support the referendum because there can be no objection to it. Thank you.
So it's a point of clarification from the last speaker. Could he just clarify that the senator who came bottom of the poll in the island-wide mandate still got more votes in St John than the previous speaker?
I'm feeling that's rhetorical as well, Deputy Tadier. Chief Minister.
Thank you, sir. Yes, Senator Mezek and I do agree on a variety of matters, but it won't be news to him that I don't agree with him on this one. And he's spoken passionately, but that actually is his opinion. And not everyone in this assembly will agree on those opinions, and that's what we call democracy. And one of the problems slightly in the wider context is that we have around reform generally is a lot of the guidelines that keep getting referred to often, and don't forget that the Vienna Convention, the Vienna Convention, that's cars, the Venice Convention, Commission even, is guidelines, get the right V's and the right C's in the right places. And actually, I quote from a paragraph in a wonderful Corporate Services Scrutiny Report of the day, which was from 2017 when this last came round. And it does actually say, the panel will conclude regarding urgency, if any change is to be identified, it cannot be hurried or based on an idea that the island may be forced to introduce change. Changes should not be made due solely to the guidelines laid down by the Venice Commission, given that these are merely guidelines. And then it talks around the disparity between the UK and Jersey in terms of historical and geographical boundaries in that particular instance. This is obviously about the bailiff. The point is that those guidelines are often designed for large countries. We are an island of 105,000, and then sometimes there will be bits where it doesn't quite work or things get magnified because any small discrepancy in a small area will get magnified. What I was going to say, sir, is that I do always find it difficult when we talk about democracy but don't want to ask the people who voted us in, i.e. the islanders. And I also make the point, sir, that around the issue around civic head, it's not removing the bailiff, it doesn't matter. Well, actually, there was one opinion, I was only going to allude to it briefly now, of past bailiffs, and possibly the present, I'm not too sure, that if one removes the bailiff as President of the Assembly or as presiding officer, depending which terminology you wish to use, then actually the role of civic head will wither on the vine. Why would the chief judge, be bailiff in the future? Why would the chief judge, be civic head of the island? So let's not be seduced by those kind of arguments. When one takes a third of the leg away, one of three legs of a stool away, it will eventually topple over. And what I wanted to also refer to, sir, and this I hope is objective. I have my strong views, but I believe this is an objective measure. I go back to the fact that when we looked at this matter in the round, and obviously I'm looking at constitutional change, this was around the boundaries and things like that of the day, but I think it applies to this as well. We asked two questions. We asked a whole range of questions of 1,000 people by Mori. It was done objectively, it was done across age ranges, and it was done across the parishes. That's how Mori work. So it should be, in theory, a representative sample of islanders. As it's 1,030 people. Question, do you think there should be greater communication with the public on matters relating to significant changes to political representation or governance or not? I think that last expression does cover the situation. Yes, 87%. No, 8%. Don't know, 5%. I think that's a fairly unequivocal result that suggests that we do need to be engaging far more with the public when we are doing these so-called minor changes. I will just add, sir, which might be relevant, because it is about states membership, but might be relevant to Deputy Labby at some point, of St Wands even, no, of St Helier, sorry. Do you think a referendum should be held on these proposed changes to states membership or not? Yes, 71%, no, 21%, don't know, 9%. Again, sir, in my view, that rests my case. That is an objective measure. It's not my opinion. I think they're about as balanced a question that can be done, and they are very clearly significant majorities in favour of that. And on that basis, that is precisely the reason I'll be supporting this amendment. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Truscott.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I want to thank the Chief Minister there, because actually you alluded to the fact that, and the bailiff has made the point, and I was just going to reiterate the exact same thing, is that we are talking about the eventual demise of the office of bailiff in Jersey. And I think that's the most significant thing about this debate that we have in front of us today. I will be speaking later on in the debate, so I'll just be very brief here. We all want to get home. I am a staunch supporter of the bailiff presiding in the chair. I made that very clear in my manifesto, and I'm just going to ask all members that they made that very clear in their manifestos to the public, that their position on this matter. I think because if you're not prepared to go and ask the people on this issue, then they will certainly let you know how they feel in 3 years' time at the ballot box. I'll put my position. I'll be supporting this and rejecting all the other amendments and main proposition. But I will talk later on in the debate. Thank you, sir.
No other member wishes to speak. I call the Constable of Greville.
Thank you, sir. That came around a little bit quicker than I thought it might. Deputy Tadier, I hope I won't repeat the points I make, because some of the speakers made the same point, so hopefully I'll address them as I go along. Deputy Tadier once again spoke about the opinion of the former Greffier. I have a great deal of respect for the former Greffier. I think anybody who was in this chamber will as well. He reminded me when I first got elected that he was a year ahead of me at school, right back to kindergarten, actually. I didn't recognise him because he'd grown quite a lot since kindergarten. But another person who I have tremendous respect for is Sir Michael Burt, and I mention him in my report. He is obviously a former bailiff, and he said that if the bailiff is removed as president of the States, it will inevitably erode his position as civic head over time. It's an opinion, whether you agree with it or not. Nobody is asking for this change. I think that was made by a number of people. Low turnout, that was mentioned by a couple of people. I don't know how they're sure of that. The 2013 referendum wasn't exactly a big turnout, but I don't really mind, sir. I know there's some people who are passionate in my parish who want to oppose this, and if that only makes up 10% of the island and nobody else cares, I'm worried about those 10%. If they take the trouble to turn out and vote, why shouldn't we take their opinion into account? And if nobody else minds one way or the other, that's really up to them. There will be an education programme, so if anybody worries that the public don't understand the principles here, there will be an education programme from the Commission, possibly from the vote.je. They will get the facts. My ex-friend, Deputy Labby, he knows I'm joking, so we go back a long way as well. We've been friends for a very long time and we'll be friends very much into the future, even if we have our disagreements over political issues. He did imply I was put up to this by the Deputy of Greville. We do work very closely together, but I contacted her to tell her that I was putting this motion forward. former referendum proposal, exactly the same as this one, some 18 months or so ago, was actually withdrawn. So I don't think the Commission couldn't comment on that if they thought it was bad, because it was withdrawn in the end, so they could have commented, but they chose not to. I believe my parishioners don't want this, and my electorate will vote that way. And so why should they not be given an opportunity at the ballot box to speak their mind? A number of speakers have spoken about the civic head thing and its opinion one way or the other. Deputy Labby plugged a price of £120,000 for the next referendum. He just plucked that out of thin air to frighten people. The last one was 70,000. I've added on 10,000. He suggests that, that there will have to be some money put forward to either side. But in the Constables referendum, the Constables restricted themselves to the limit allowed by a senator, for a senator, should I say. I think that's less than £10,000. So if each side had £10,000, it would only be £100,000. I think that was a bit of a scare tactic. Deputy Guida, merci bien. It's the only time I'll speak French in here, my time here, I suspect. He talks, I've not known him very long, but he talks common sense, and of course I agree with what he said. He basically made the point that those who don't want a referendum are the ones that are always talking about representation. Thank you to Constable of Trinity for his input. Deputy Morrell was incensed that the 2013 referendum wasn't followed. He wasn't the only one, but there are people like me who actually think that a three-way referendum like that was flawed, and in my report it does explain that more people who took part in that referendum did not vote for option B as a first and second item. If this referendum goes ahead, I will follow the wishes of my electorate. So if they vote against the proposal, I will vote against I will support, or I will go vote against as well. If they vote to support the proposal to remove the bailiff, then I will vote with them as well. I agree with the Councillor of St Mary's dog and his choir. He assumes the result of the referendum will be against, but I don't know. I might be wrong and he might be wrong, but we should find out. Deputy Gardner, somebody came to the island 10 years ago, but now very much a Jersey woman. She came with a perception from outside, but now she's in Jersey. She sees things a very different way. Deputy Ash was one of the people who thought we'd be getting rid of the bailiff. I mentioned that already. I just hope he pushes the wrong button again. One or two people mentioned it as a wrecking motion. I'm not sure what that means, really. If that's what it is, that's what it is. But I'm not frightened of being told that that's a wrecking motion. But it's really all about getting the view of the general public. Deputy Mesick said something about contradictions in my report, but then didn't appear to mention any. I don't, incidentally, have the problem at all with the Senator bringing this proposition. It was in his manifesto. Absolutely have no problem with that whatsoever. He said the question would be very difficult to set. Well, actually, the question has already been set, if you like, by the Commission 18 months ago, and they were quite happy that the question could be put in a completely unbiased way. We often get this thing that constables don't face elections. Well, I get re-elected every 4 years like everybody else. I did face a contested election the first time I was elected. It was a by-election, and it was a massive turnout because people like the parish elections. I think the turnout was just short of 50%. So I'm quite happy, and I also know that if I'm not doing a good job, somebody will stand against me in 3 years' time and succeed, as Constable of St Saviour's did, as Constable of St Mary's did. We're not here, it's not a job for life. If you're not doing a good job, you will get ousted. So it's getting late. Oh, I'm a minute late now because it's after past. I can't say anything more really, but I do urge members to ask the general public before we make this very serious change. Thank you, sir.
Bell is called for. I ask members to return to their seats. And I ask the greffier to open the voting. Members have had the opportunities to cast their votes. I can say that the amendment has been adopted. 25 votes per, 22 votes contra.
We have them both ways, please, sir.
Those voting for, Senators Farnham, Ferguson and Le Fondre, the Connétables of St Clement, St Lawrence, St Saviour, St Brelard, Grouville, St John, Trinity, St Peter, St Mary, St Juan and St Martin. Deputies Martin, Grouville, Lewis, St Martin, St Mary, Truscott, Guida, St Peter, Trinity, Lehegara and Gardner. Those voting contre, Senators Valois, Moore, Pallett and Mezek, the Connétable of St Helier, and Deputies Southern, Tadier, Higgins, Pinnell, St Juan, Doublé, Labby, Wickenden, Young, Ash, Morel, St John, Ayer, Pershard, Ward, Alves and Pamplin.
The Assembly will carry on with this debate on the Second Amendment tomorrow. Stands adjourned until 9:30.